before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I never thought the silence of the mountains could feel so loud. I've camped in some of the most beautiful places this country offers. I've seen sunsets paint the sky over desert sands, felt the salty spray of ocean waves crash against rugged cliffs, and slept beneath stars so dense they seem to weigh down the night. But nothing compares to the quiet that settles over Glacier National Park after the tourists leave. That silence isn't empty. It's full, thick, heavy, and almost alive. My name's Jason. I'm 38, an RV traveler who's spent the last decade chasing the kind of solitude only the wild can give. I've always loved Glacier. Those jagged peaks crowned with ancient ice, meadows bursting with wildflowers, and lakes so clear you can see straight to the bottom. But my last trip there, a few summers ago, changed how I see this place forever. I arrived in mid-August, just as the crowds started to thin. The summer heat still hung in the air, but evenings were crisp, biting like a cold reminder that winter waits patiently. Always. I found a spot at Apgar Campground, right on the edge of the forest and close enough to Lake McDonald to hear the water lap gently against the shore. It felt like home. The first night was perfect. A campfire crackling, the stars so sharp you could almost count them, and the smell of pine thick in the cool air. But as midnight deepened, I started noticing sounds I couldn't explain. A faint rustling in the underbrush, too light for a bear, but too deliberate for the wind. The way the trees seemed to lean just a little closer, like they were eavesdropping. I tried to brush it off as nerves, the kind that come from being alone in the wilderness. But the quiet kept shifting, stretching thin into something almost unbearable. The next morning, I met Lucy and her father, Tom. Lucy was 26, an avid hiker with a laugh that could cut through the thickest fog. Tom was a local, a retired ranger who knew Glacier's trails like the back of his hand. They'd been camping nearby for a week, chasing waterfall trails and fishing spots hidden deep in the park. Over coffee, Lucy told me about a trail she discovered, one less traveled, veiled behind a thicket of alpine firs. She said the trail led to a hidden lake, one locals called the Mirror. They'd been thinking about camping there the next night, just the three of us. The idea thrilled me, a chance to break from the crowded campgrounds, to sleep surrounded by wilderness so pure it felt untouched by time. That afternoon, we packed up and headed out, driving my RV to the trailhead where cars gave way to footsteps. The road narrowed, flanked by towering evergreens that blurred into a wall of green. At the end, we parked, grabbed our packs, and set off on foot. The hike was everything I imagined. Crisp air smelling of damp earth and wildflowers, bird song echoing between peaks, and the crunch of needles underfoot. But as we neared the Mirror, the world seemed to hold its breath. The lake was a flawless glass, perfectly reflecting the jagged peaks and the sky's slow dance of clouds. We set up camp on its shore, the ground soft and cool beneath our feet. That night, the stars blazed with an almost painful intensity, but the silence around us had deepened into something else. A presence. At first, it was just a feeling, a shiver that ran down my spine when the wind stilled or the shadows deepened. But then came the sounds. Quiet at first, like whispers riding on the breeze, and then more distinct. Faint footsteps circling the camp, a low moan carried from the trees, the snap of a twig too close for comfort. Lucy laughed nervously, saying it was probably just animals or other campers playing tricks on us. Tom, though, grew quiet. He told us stories about the park, legends of spirits tied to the glaciers, of travelers who disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the mountains. I wanted to believe it was just stories, but the fear was real, and it crept into my bones. That night, I barely slept. I woke more times than I can count to the sound of something pacing just beyond the firelight, eyes watching from the darkness. The air felt electric, alive with a danger that wasn't quite natural. When dawn finally broke, we packed quickly, our nerves frayed and our smiles forced. But as we stepped away from the lake, something shifted. The trail we'd taken to get there had vanished. Not disappeared. Vanished. Gone. We searched for hours, retracing our steps, but every path led us deeper into the forest, deeper into an endless maze of trees and shadows. Panic set in. The mountains seemed to mock us, silent and indifferent as the sun rose higher, burning through the mist. Hours later, we stumbled onto a faint path, one I didn't recognize, leading toward a ridge. From the top, the view was breathtaking, but the relief was short-lived. In the valley below, I saw the glint of a small lake. But it wasn't the mirror. It was different. Darker. The realization hit me hard. We weren't going to leave the park the way we came. That night, back on the ridge, the wind howled like a living thing. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, wrapping the trees in a suffocating embrace. We kept the fire low, huddling close, but the forest's watchful eyes felt endless. I fought the creeping dread with everything I had, telling myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, paranoia. But when the whispers came again, clear as day, I couldn't deny it. We weren't alone. By the third day, hunger gnawed at us, but the true terror was the feeling that we were being followed, watched by something patient and ancient. We moved slowly, never resting in one place too long. And then, just as the sun dipped below the peaks, we found the road again. A narrow ribbon of asphalt, twisting like a lifeline through the trees. We didn't speak much as we drove back to Apgar, the normal world slowly seeping back in with the hum of engines and distant voices. But even now, months later, I carry the weight of those days with me. Glacier isn't just a place of breathtaking beauty. It's a place that tests you, that forces you to listen to the silence, to respect the shadows, to honor the unseen. Camping there changed me, taught me that nature's majesty holds secrets darker and deeper than any trail map or guidebook can show, and that sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones whispered around a campfire. They're the ones the mountains keep, waiting for those who dare to listen. The silence from those mountains didn't fade when I left Glacier National Park. It followed me, settling into my bones like a cold shadow that refused to lift. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it again. The faint rustling just beyond the edge of the campfire's glow. The whispers that carried on the wind like secrets meant only for the dark. But more than that, what stayed with me was the knowledge that some places don't want to be found. That beneath all the beauty, there's a weight, something ancient and patient, watching. Back in Apgar, we tried to shake off the tension, but the park had already marked us. I remember sitting in the RV with Lucy and Tom, the three of us barely speaking, our eyes darting toward the forest as if expecting it to step through the trees. Tom finally broke the silence with a quiet warning. Glacier's not just a park, it's a guardian, and sometimes it's more than you're ready for. I wanted to argue, to say it was just nerves, just the exhaustion of the hike. But deep down, I knew better. That night, alone in my RV, I replayed everything over and over. The vanished trail, the eerie voices, the watchful eyes in the dark. I felt the walls close in around me, the shadows grow longer, as if the forest itself had followed me home. Sleep came in fitful bursts, each one shattered by the creak of the RV settling or the distant call of an owl, sounding almost like a human sigh. The cold seeped through the windows, though the heater hummed quietly. I pulled the blanket tighter, heart pounding, waiting for something I couldn't name. By morning, I knew I had to leave. The mountains had spoken, and I was no longer welcome. Driving away from Glacier felt like waking from a dream that you never wanted to end, even though it had turned dark. The majestic peaks faded behind me, their silent watch lingering like a ghost on the air. But I carried with me a lesson, a reminder that the wilderness is alive in ways we can't always see, and that sometimes survival means listening to the quiet unease before it turns to terror. Now, every time I pack up my RV and head into the wild, I carry that unease with me, a cautious respect for the places where beauty and danger walk hand in hand. Because it's not just about adventure or escape, it's about knowing when to push forward and when to turn back before the shadows close in. Glacier's mountains taught me that, and that lesson is etched in my soul, as sharp and relentless as the glaciers themselves. The road back to civilization stretched long and winding, each mile peeling me further away from the mountain's silent grip, but the unease didn't loosen its hold. It was strange how the forest seemed to haunt me still, as if those jagged peaks and whispering trees had followed me beyond their borders. When I finally stopped at a gas station outside the park, I caught my reflection in the window, eyes rimmed red, hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and something deeper, a creeping dread I couldn't quite explain. I kept asking myself, was it real? Or was it just the weight of solitude pushing me over the edge? But the truth is, some part of me knew. Glacier doesn't just hold wilderness, it harbors secrets. Stories left unspoken, shadows cast by glaciers themselves, watching patiently for those who dare step too far off the beaten path. Weeks later, when I told my story around campfires in places far from Montana, I could see it in the faces of fellow RVers, the tight clench of their jaws, the way their eyes flickered toward the trees beyond the circle of light. They've all heard the legends, felt the uneasy hush settle over those mountains, and yet they keep coming back. I learned that fear in Glacier isn't like the sudden jolt you get from a barking coyote or the snap of a twig underfoot. It's a slow burn, a quiet suspicion that gnaws at you in the dark, whispering doubts and warning signs you can't quite name. It's the way the cold wind lingers just a moment too long, how the forest presses in with a weight heavier than the trees themselves. But more than that, it's a lesson in humility. The mountains remind you that no matter how far you've traveled, no matter how tough you think you are, nature holds the ultimate power. It can calm you with beauty, then unravel you with silence. It can give you moments of peace that feel eternal, then take everything away in a breath. That's the true face of Glacier National Park. Not just the postcard perfect vistas or the postcard perfect camping spots, but the raw, terrifying majesty that humbles every camper who listens closely enough. And as I look back on those days, I realize that the scars left by those mountains aren't wounds. They're reminders. Reminders to respect the wilderness, to listen to the quiet unease, and to carry that fear like a lantern, guiding you safely through the shadows. Because in the end, survival isn't just about outrunning what scares you. It's about understanding it, accepting it, and learning from it, so you can keep moving forward, no matter what waits beyond the next ridge. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last, but something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael desert as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70 heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive, needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy Mallister, bones to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter Emily. Haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me, just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red, and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. I muttered a curse, pulling the rig over onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit working and stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed, the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the back, trying to figure out what was causing the problem. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping. No, not tapping, scratching. It was coming from the crate, a large wooden crate strapped down into the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart started to pound in my chest, the kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching got louder. The crate shifted just slightly, as though something inside was alive. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it, not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B. No questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought, some government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, and I jumped in my seat. Static. Then through the fuzz, I heard something faint. A voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song, one I hadn't heard since she passed. It was one of her favorites. "No," I muttered, turning the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days, that's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. I thought they were just shadows at first, shapes in the mist thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People walking along the roadside. No, not people. Ghosts. Old men in trucker caps, women in long, flowing dresses, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. The trailer lurched hard, like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving the rig as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there, nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again, then came the knocking, loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding on the inside of the crate. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road again, hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open. And then everything stopped. The wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, but blackened with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started. Not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirling in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out, one voice I knew, Roy. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder, and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I'd seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust, I could see them again, the figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar, faces I'd seen on the road before, long-dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself parted, I saw her, Carol, standing in the middle of the road, her white dress flowing in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked the wheel, swerving to avoid her, but the rig skidded off the road. The trailer jackknifed as it skidded across the desert sand. I barely managed to hang on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone. No signal, no way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again, Carol, walking slowly toward me. Her face, pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. "Roy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "It's time to come home." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there waiting as the darkness closed in around me. The mist rolled in quicker than I'd expected, but I didn't mind. I loved the fog, loved the way it muted everything, softened the edges of the world, made it all feel a little more mysterious. It was perfect for my project. Whispers of the Wild was going to be my best work yet. I could feel it after everything I'd been through in the past year, hell, in the past month. This was the reset I needed. Just me, my camera, and the Smoky Mountains. No one to answer to, no one to lean on. Just the way I liked it. I hefted my backpack higher on my shoulders and adjusted my camera strap. The trail was rough, more overgrown than I'd expected, but that was part of the draw. The more remote the location, the better the shot. No tourists ruining the landscape with their neon jackets or loud conversations, just untouched wilderness. But untouched wilderness had its downsides. My camera had been acting up since I'd arrived. I'd missed some great shots because of it. Fog rolling over the peaks, a hawk perched on a branch just feet away. But I told myself I didn't care. This trip wasn't about getting everything right. It was about getting away. I paused to catch my breath and set the camera down on a fallen log. The lens fogged up almost instantly in the damp air, and when I wiped it off with the corner of my jacket, I realized I'd smeared dirt across it. Typical. "Come on," I muttered, digging into my bag for a lens cloth. As I crouched there, rubbing at the stubborn streak of mud, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first I thought it was a woodpecker. There were plenty of them around these parts. But it didn't sound right. Too slow, too steady. Tap, pause. Tap, pause. I looked up, but the fog was thickening, swallowing the trees just a few yards ahead of me. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was just a branch knocking against a tree in the wind. I wasn't scared of being out here alone. In fact, I preferred it. No one to distract me, no one to get in my head. Still, the silence that followed felt too quiet, like something was waiting. I shoved the lens cloth back into my pack and stood up, forcing myself to move on. I had a campsite to reach before dark, and I wasn't about to get spooked by a weird noise, at least not this early in the trip. The fog never really lifted by the time I reached the clearing where I planned to camp. It was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. I set up my tent quickly, more out of habit than anything else, though I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I wasn't sure why. There was no one around, no animals scurrying through the underbrush, not even a bird call to break the stillness. I figured a good night's sleep would shake off the nerves. I was just tired. The last few months had been brutal. Breaking up with Paul, the constant fights before it, the way he made me feel like I couldn't do anything right. This trip was supposed to be my way of proving him wrong, proving to myself that I didn't need him, that I didn't need anyone. But the anxiety crept up on me anyway, a tight knot in my chest as I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the ceiling of my tent. Then there was that tapping again, faint and far off. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, just the wind, just the forest. But then it stopped abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch, and I heard something else, something worse. A whisper. It was so faint I could barely make it out, but it was there, threading through the fog outside. It didn't sound like words, not exactly, but it was too rhythmic to be wind, too deliberate. I sat up, listening hard, my heart racing. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it through the thin walls of the tent. Just mist and shadows. The whispering stopped, but the silence that followed felt alive, thick with something I couldn't name. I switched off the light, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I packed up quickly. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I just wanted to get moving. The fog had lifted slightly, but the forest felt wrong somehow. It was holding its breath. I didn't like it. I wanted to get to higher ground, get some better shots, and move on. By midday, I'd made it to a rocky ridge that overlooked a valley. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of shot I'd come for. The fog clung to the trees below, creating a sea of white with the mountain peaks poking through like islands. I snapped a few photos, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. When I reviewed the pictures on my camera, my breath caught in my throat. There were figures in the fog. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just shadows cast by the trees. But the more I zoomed in, the clearer they became. Tall, thin shapes, barely visible, but definitely there. Human or something like it, standing motionless among the trees, watching me. I whipped my head around, scanning the valley below. There was no one, just mist and trees. But in the photos, the figures were there. I lowered the camera, heart pounding. I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have. And yet, the air around me felt suddenly cold. Not the kind of cold that comes with a change in the weather. This was different, deeper, like it had seeped into my bones. I should have left right then, packed up, and headed back to the main trail. But I didn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was keeping me here, pulling me deeper into the wilderness. That night, I camped by a small stream. I hadn't seen any more figures, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. I felt like I was being watched constantly. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I built a fire more for comfort than warmth and tried to distract myself by reviewing the day's photos. That's when I noticed something else. The figures in the fog weren't in just one picture. They were in all of them. Some barely visible, others clearer, standing in groups or alone. Always watching, always there. My hands started shaking, and I nearly dropped the camera. It was impossible. I'd been out there for hours, and I hadn't seen anyone. Not a single hiker, no animals, no birds. But there they were in every shot. Suddenly, the whispering started again. It was louder this time, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The beam of light cut through the mist, but I couldn't see anything. Still, the whispering grew louder, like it was circling me, coming from all directions at once. You shouldn't be here. That's what it sounded like, a woman's voice, soft but firm, blending with the rustling leaves and flowing water. It wasn't clear, not exactly, but the meaning was clear. I wasn't welcome. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest and back toward the tent. The whispering followed me, growing sharper, angrier. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, tall and thin, dressed in old ragged clothes. Her face was pale, hollow-eyed, and filled with sorrow. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. The flashlight flickered back to life, and the whispering stopped. I didn't sleep that night. By the time dawn broke, I knew I had to leave. This wasn't some trick of the mind. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, there was something in these woods, something angry, and I had trespassed. I packed up my gear in record time and set off toward the trailhead. But the forest seemed different now, like the trees were closing in on me. The path I'd taken to get here was gone, swallowed by the fog. My compass spun wildly, useless, and the map was no help in the unmarked wilderness. Panic gnawed at my insides as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to keep my bearings. But the more I walked, the more lost I became. And all the while I could feel her watching, waiting. The whispering started again as I crossed the small clearing, louder this time, angrier. I dropped my pack, desperate, and spun around. There she was, standing in the mist, her eyes locked on mine. I fell to my knees, breath coming in ragged gasps. I'm sorry, I whispered, though my voice was barely audible over the growing wind. I didn't mean to. Her expression softened just slightly, and for the first time, I felt something other than fear. She wasn't just angry, she was in pain. I'm sorry, I repeated, louder this time. I shouldn't be here. I didn't know. The wind died down, the whispering faded, and slowly the figure in the mist began to dissolve, melting back into the fog. I sat there for what felt like hours, heart racing, too afraid to move. But she was gone. The air felt lighter, the forest less oppressive. When I finally stood, I saw it. Small, barely visible in the fog, a stone, hidden among the trees. A grave, long forgotten, buried deep in the wilderness. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close. I just stood there for a moment, paying my respects to the spirit I'd disturbed. Then, without looking back, I turned and walked away. I made it out of the Smokies that day, but the images, the figures in the fog, the woman's sorrowful eyes followed me. I never published the photos from that trip. Some things, I realized, weren't meant to be captured. Some things were meant to be left alone. My name is Kai Walker, and back in 2023, I took my old RV up to Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia. After years of working behind a desk, I figured some fresh air might do me good, or at least give my laptop a tan break. You see, I'm the kind of guy who thinks outside is that place you walk through to get from your house to your car. So there I was, a city slicker in the wilderness, trying to ignite a campfire with nothing but 2 sticks and sheer willpower. Spoiler alert, sticks don't combust out of sheer embarrassment. I ended up using a lighter and some old receipts. Turns out my tax documents were good for something after all. The campsite was nestled near a dense forest, the kind that looks picturesque until you realize there are more bugs than pixels in an old video game. My RV was parked by a small clearing overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Honestly, it was the kind of view that makes you consider quitting your job and writing poetry, if only I had a knack for rhyming anything other than cat and hat. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I settled into a foldable chair with a lukewarm beer. That's when I noticed an older gentleman at the campsite next to mine. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face that suggested he'd seen more sunsets than I had hot meals. He gave me a nod and I raised my beer in return. "Evening," he said. "First time up here? That obvious?" I chuckled. He smiled. "Just a hunch. Name's Harold." "Kai," I replied. We chatted for a bit and he told me about the best hiking trails and fishing spots. He seemed friendly enough and it was nice to have someone to talk to besides the mosquitoes. Before long, he headed back to his site and I retreated into my RV for the night. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of rustling outside. At first, I dismissed it as wildlife, probably a raccoon rummaging through my trash, but then I heard muffled voices. Peering through the window, I saw 2 figures moving near Harold's campsite. They were dressed in dark clothing, and something about their movements made my skin crawl. Probably just late-night hikers, I told myself. After all, who was I to judge? I'd once gone grocery shopping at 2 a.m., wearing pajama bottoms and flip-flops. But then a sharp cry pierced the night, followed by a thud. My heart pounded in my chest. That was no raccoon, and those weren't hikers. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, only to remember I had 0 reception out here. "Perfect," I muttered. Should have invested in that satellite phone instead of the deluxe cup holder. Summoning every ounce of courage, or maybe just a strong sense of curiosity, I decided to check it out. I slipped on my shoes and crept outside, keeping to the shadows as I approached Harold's site. The flickering light of his dying campfire cast eerie shadows. I spotted Harold lying on the ground, motionless. The 2 figures were rifling through his belongings. "Hey!" I shouted before I could stop myself. They snapped their heads toward me. One was a burly man with a shaved head and a jagged scar running down his cheek. The other was shorter, wearing a hoodie that obscured his face. "Mind your own business," the big one growled. "Funny," I quipped nervously. "I was just about to say the same to you." Without warning, the smaller one pulled out a knife. "Looks like we've got ourselves another problem," he sneered. My survival instincts, or perhaps my panic, kicked in. I turned on my heel and sprinted back toward my RV. Behind me, I heard them giving chase. Just my luck, I thought. I finally start running, and it's not even for exercise. I reached the RV and slammed the door shut, locking it. My hands trembled as I fumbled to find the keys. The engine roared to life just as they started pounding on the door. The RV lurched forward, and I sped down the narrow dirt road. Branches scraped against the sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. In my rearview mirror, I saw their silhouettes fade into the darkness. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The road ahead forked, and in my haste, I had no idea which way led to safety, left or right. "Eeny, meeny, meeny," I mumbled. A loud bang cut me off. The RV jolted, and I realized I'd blown a tire. Fantastic. Next time I'm vacationing at a five-star hotel, I grumbled. I had no choice but to keep moving, driving on the rim. I could hear the metal grinding against the gravel. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a dim light flickering through the trees. A house out here. Desperate, I pulled into a makeshift driveway leading up to a rustic cabin, parking haphazardly. I jumped out and raced to the front door, pounding on it. "Hello, is anyone home? I need help." The door creaked open, and a middle-aged woman with kind eyes peered out. "Goodness, what's the matter?" she asked. "There's been an attack," I gasped. "My friend, an older man, he's hurt. We need to call the police." She ushered me inside. "Calm down, dear. The nearest phone is a few miles away, but my husband can drive you," she called out, and a tall man appeared from another room, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What's all the commotion?" I quickly explained the situation. He grabbed a set of keys. "Let's get you to the ranger station." As we headed out, I noticed a collection of hunting rifles mounted on the wall. "Any chance we could arm ourselves?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not necessary. Besides, those are antiques." We got into his pickup truck, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this nightmare was ending. As we drove down the winding road, I glanced back and saw the woman's silhouette in the doorway, watching us. "Strange night, huh?" Tom remarked. "You have no idea." I sighed. We drove in silence for a few minutes before the truck slowed to a stop. "Why are we stopping?" I asked. He turned to face me, his expression devoid of warmth. "End of the line." My stomach dropped. From the shadows, the two attackers emerged, grins plastered across their faces. "You did good, Tom," the big one said. "Family sticks together," Tom replied. "I was trapped. You're all in this together," the smaller one chuckled. "Smart guy," the big one said. "Shame we can't let you leave." Panic surged through me. "Look, I don't have anything valuable. Take whatever you want." The big guy cracked his knuckles. "Oh, it's not about that. We can't have witnesses," he added. Desperation took over. I flung the door open and bolted into the woods. Branches whipped against my face and roots threatened to trip me with every step. Behind me, their footsteps and laughter echoed. "Run, rabbit, run," one of them taunted. Note to self, cardio is important, I wheezed. I stumbled upon a small creek and splashed through it, hoping to mask my trail. The forest was a maze, and my sense of direction was as reliable as a chocolate teapot. I needed a hiding spot. Up ahead, I spotted an old abandoned mine entrance. Without thinking, I darted inside. The darkness swallowed me, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. I crouched behind a large boulder, trying to steady my breathing. Footsteps approached the entrance. "He couldn't have gone far," Tom's voice echoed. "Split up," the big guy ordered. "He might be hiding inside." I held my breath as flashlight beams danced across the walls. Sweat trickled down my forehead, and my heart pounded like a drum solo at a rock concert. Just then, a faint whisper reached my ears. "This way," it seemed to say. I glanced around but saw no one. Great. Now I'm hearing things, I thought. But the whisper came again, more insistent. Against my better judgment, or perhaps because I had no better options, I followed the sound deeper into the mine. The tunnel narrowed and the floor sloped downward. Behind me, the voices of my pursuers grew fainter. The path led me to a small chamber where faint light filtered through cracks above. In the dim glow, I saw markings on the walls, names and dates carved into the stone. One name stood out. Harold Johnston, 1975. "Harold," I murmured. "Harold," the man from the campsite. Footsteps echoed down the tunnel. They were getting closer. I spotted a narrow crevice at the back of the chamber. Squeezing through, I found myself in another passage that led upward. Clambering over rocks, I emerged outside on a hillside overlooking the forest. I took a moment to catch my breath. The cool night air was a relief, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. I needed to find help. In the distance, I saw the faint glow of lights, probably the ranger station Tom had mentioned. With renewed determination, I made my way toward it, careful to stay hidden. Half an hour later, scratched and exhausted, I stumbled into the station alone. A ranger sat behind a desk, surprised at my disheveled appearance. "Whoa, what happened to you?" I quickly recounted the night's events. He listened attentively, his expression growing serious. "That's quite a tale," he said. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in that area." He picked up a radio and called for backup. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he assured me. Within the hour, police officers arrived. They took my statement and organized a search team. As dawn approached, They returned with grim news. They had found Harold's campsite and his body. Looks like he put up a fight, one of the officers noted. But there's more. They uncovered a makeshift burial site near the cabin. Inside were several bodies in various states of decay. Among them was the real Tom, the owner of the cabin, who had been missing for months. The man posing as Tom was identified as Richard Rick Thompson, a drifter with a history of violence. The others were his accomplices, Mark and Joey Thompson, his brothers. In the end, after the chaos had settled, I learned that the Thompson brothers had been preying on campers for years, using the secluded area to commit their heinous acts. I didn't believe in ghosts, UFOs, or anything supernatural. I spent most of my career chasing down so-called paranormal phenomena and explaining them with cold, hard facts. That was my job, turning superstition into science, myths into measurable data. The Brown Mountain lights? They were just another mystery waiting for a rational explanation. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV up the winding roads of Pisgah National Forest. The thick trees closed in on either side, the air was crisp, and autumn leaves scattered across the path. There was a quiet stillness that made the world feel far away. I should have felt calm, excited, even. But as the sun began to sink behind the distant ridges, leaving the forest bathed in shadow, I felt something else, tension. Shaking it off, I parked the RV at the remote campsite I'd scouted. This was supposed to be a solo trip, a few days to get up close and personal with the Brown Mountain lights, interview locals, take readings, and prove once and for all that the lights were nothing more than atmospheric conditions or optical illusions. I had all the gear I'd need, high-resolution cameras, thermal scanners, EMF detectors, the works. I wasn't expecting to find anything supernatural, just an anomaly, and anomalies had explanations. But the moment I stepped out of the RV, a chill ran through me. The trees rustled softly, as if whispering some secret I wasn't meant to hear. "Focus," I muttered to myself, dragging my gear out and setting up the cameras, angling them toward Brown Mountain Ridge. I had a perfect view of the ridge from my campsite, miles away but clear in the distance. That's where the lights were supposed to appear. By the time I was fully settled in, I was sitting outside the RV, bundled in a jacket, sipping coffee and staring out into the dark, waiting. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. Then, around midnight, I saw them. At first, they were faint, flickering, small orbs of light hovering just above the ridge. I squinted, adjusting the focus on my binoculars. There they were. 3 lights bobbing in the air like they were floating on an invisible current. I grabbed my camera, flipping the switch to start recording, but nothing happened. The lens stayed black. The screen, dead. "What the hell?" I muttered, fiddling with the buttons. Fully charged and brand new, the camera shouldn't have malfunctioned. I checked the battery, clicked it back into place, and tried again. Still nothing. Frustration surged through me. This was exactly what I'd come here for. The lights, right there in front of me, and I couldn't even capture them. I stood up, grabbing my thermal scanner, but when I flipped it on, the screen flickered, then went dark. "Come on," I whispered, trying to stay calm. The gear wasn't cheap, and none of it should have been failing, but it was. Piece by piece, the lights danced on the ridge, growing brighter, closer. My heart raced. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I was just annoyed. The logical part of my brain struggled to make sense of it. Maybe the electronics were glitching because of interference, some kind of electromagnetic field or something. I took a deep breath, trying to settle my nerves. But the lights, those strange pulsing orbs, kept moving, almost as if they were drifting toward me. The air turned cold. So cold that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. A thin layer of frost started forming on the ground, on the RV windows, on my gear. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my hands beginning to stiffen in the chill. It didn't make sense. The weather forecast had called for a cool night, but nothing like this. I checked my phone's temperature app. 30 degrees? Impossible. I glanced at my surroundings, feeling the silence close in around me. Then I noticed the lights were no longer on the ridge. They were much closer now, floating just above the treetops, flickering like distant fireflies but larger. Too large. I watched, heart pounding, as they bobbed and weaved. Their glow cast long shadows on the ground. I pulled out my phone to take a video. The screen flashed, then went black. It wouldn't turn on. Frustration boiled over. I slammed the phone down on the camping table. It bounced. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my cool. This was why people got sucked into believing nonsense, because technology failed at the worst possible moment. The lights weren't supernatural. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the cold was messing with the equipment or some kind of atmospheric distortion. But then I saw the handprints. Small, faint handprints etched in frost on the RV window. They hadn't been there before. I knew that. I stared at them, my breath catching in my throat. They looked like the handprints of a child, no more than a few inches across, and they were slowly, gradually melting away in the cold. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I turned to look at the lights, now hovering at the edge of the forest, close enough that I could make out their eerie bluish glow. They flickered in the trees, moving in slow, lazy circles, as if they were watching me, waiting for me. The rational part of my mind screamed that it was impossible. There was no way the lights could have traveled that fast. No way they could be this close. I'd seen videos, read reports. They were always distant, spectral, unreachable. But now they felt personal, as if they were beckoning me. I swallowed, my throat tight. Without thinking, I took a step forward. The cold deepened, pressing in on me from all sides. The frost crept up the sides of the RV, spreading like delicate veins. The temperature continued to drop. My breath came out in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred. The lights drifted deeper into the trees, flickering and glowing, moving in a pattern that felt deliberate, like they wanted me to follow, and I did. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I made my way toward the forest's edge. The beam of light was weak, barely cutting through the dark. I kept my eyes on the lights, feeling a strange pull in my chest, like something was urging me forward. As I entered the trees, the world grew darker. The lights danced just out of reach, always a few steps ahead of me, their glow casting an ethereal light on the twisted branches. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. I hadn't even noticed. My legs ached, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea how far I'd wandered. The lights flickered again, the brightening as they circled a large boulder ahead, and then they stopped, hovering there, motionless. I took a step closer, and that's when the hallucinations began. Shapes, faint figures moving in the trees, shadows stretching unnaturally long. And there between the branches I saw faces, pale, expressionless faces staring at me with hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. Panic set in. I turned to leave, but the forest had shifted. The path I'd taken was no longer clear. Everything looked the same. The same trees, the same twisting branches. The lights pulsed behind me, glowing brighter as if taunting me. I ran. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My heart raced in my chest as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to find my way back to the campsite. The lights flickered at the corners of my vision, but I ignored them. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, quick footsteps crunching through the frost behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran faster, my flashlight flickering and dying in my hand. I broke through the tree line, gasping for air, and saw the RV ahead, a welcome sight. But the air around it was colder than ever. The frost was so thick on the windows that it looked like snow. And there, pressed against the glass, were more handprints. Dozens of them. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me, and collapsed on the floor, panting. My entire body trembled with cold and fear. The lights were still out there. I could see them through the frosted windows, flickering in the trees, growing fainter as the night wore on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By dawn, they were gone. The temperature returned to normal, and the frost melted away. But I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I packed up the RV and drove out of Pisgah National Forest, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I'd come here to find an explanation, to debunk the brown mountain lights. But what I found was something else, something I couldn't explain. And I knew deep down that the lights weren't just a phenomenon. They were something more, something ancient, something dangerous, something that had almost taken me. I don't know what they wanted, but I'll never go back to find out. I've always found comfort in the silence of the woods, out here, away from people, away from the world. You can think straight. George Washington and Jefferson National Forest have been my sanctuary for years. my escape from the clutter of civilization. But this time, something felt different. It was as if the land itself was holding a secret it didn't want to share. It had been a rough few months. Lisa left me, and I couldn't say I didn't see it coming. I'd been distant, losing myself in work, then losing the work altogether. I thought a few days alone, hunting and camping, would clear my head. I needed space, and the mountains were the only place I knew where I could truly breathe. The plan was simple. 3 days, 4 tops. Head out to the edge of Silent Pines, an area where the deer roam freely and the mountains are still untouched by the tourist crowd. I'd bag a buck, maybe 2, and return with meat for the freezer. Just me, my gear, and the quiet hum of nature. But it didn't take long for that comfort and hum to go disturbingly quiet. The first day was uneventful, at least at first. I parked my truck at the trailhead, loaded up my pack, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and began the familiar hike into the heart of the forest. My boots crunched over the leaf-covered trail as I climbed higher, the dense trees closing in around me. The fresh mountain air was cool, the perfect kind of crisp that made you feel alive, but something was off. I noticed it halfway through the hike. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, were missing. There was only the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional creak of the trees swaying gently in the wind. I shook it off as nerves. It was always a little eerie out here in the deep woods, especially when you were alone. That was part of the appeal. I told myself it was just the tension I'd been feeling lately, everything weighing on my chest, turning normal things into problems. I set up camp in the clearing near the stream I remembered from previous trips. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountain ridge, casting long shadows over the landscape. The fire crackled warmly as I cooked up some canned stew, sipping from a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, trying to push away the gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't until later that night, after the fire had burned low and I was stretched out in my sleeping bag, that I noticed the first real sign: footsteps. At first I thought it was just an animal. I mean, what else could it be? Deer? Maybe a raccoon? But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like someone walking, a soft, deliberate crunch in the leaves, moving slowly as if it was circling the camp. I lay still, holding my breath, listening intently. The steps grew closer, then stopped. I sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight and rifle by my side. The firelight flickered dimly, casting long, jittery shadows around the clearing, but there was nothing there. I scanned the tree line, heart pounding harder than I'd like to admit. Nothing moved. Just trees standing tall and silent, watching. "Must have been the wind," I muttered, my voice shaky. I lay back down, my grip tight on the rifle. I'd always prided myself on being a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy, but something about those footsteps didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the sound itself, it was the feeling that came with it, like I was being watched. The next morning, things got worse. My water jug was gone. I thought I'd been careful about where I left it, but maybe I hadn't sealed it tight. Maybe an animal dragged it off during the night. I searched the area looking for signs of raccoons or coyotes, but all I found were footprints. Human, barefoot, and small, like a child's. But what child would be wandering around the woods miles away from the nearest road in the dead of night? I crouched down, running my fingers over the soft dirt where the prints had pressed into the earth. They seemed fresh, leading in a slow, meandering pattern around the campsite before disappearing into the woods. My skin crawled, a chill running down my spine as I stared at the tracks, my mind racing through every possible explanation. None of them made sense. By midday, I had convinced myself it must have been some local kids playing a prank. Maybe I'd stumbled into someone's turf without realizing it. But as I hiked deeper into the woods, rifle ready, the sense of unease only grew stronger. Every step I took felt heavy, like the trees themselves were watching me, closing in tighter. Then I saw it. I was tracking a deer along the ridgeline when I noticed movement in the trees just ahead. At first, I thought it was the buck I'd been hunting, but then it stepped out into the clearing, a figure, tall, hunched, and gaunt. Its body was draped in shadow, but I could see the faint outline of its pale, too long limbs, twisted in ways a man shouldn't be. And those eyes, 2 glowing yellow eyes, staring right at me. I froze, rifle raised, heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the wind dead and still around us. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, watching me. "Who the hell are you?" I called out, my voice cracking in the silence. No answer. I swallowed hard, taking a step back. The figure disappeared into the trees as silently as it had appeared. My hands were shaking, the rifle's barrel wobbling as I lowered it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, but I knew better. I'd seen it, and whatever it wasn't human. That night, the footsteps returned, louder this time, circling the camp with purpose. I stayed awake, rifle in hand, listening to the crunch of leaves as it moved closer. Every time I thought I'd hear it right outside my tent, the steps would stop, leaving only the suffocating silence. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even close my eyes without imagining those yellow eyes watching me from the darkness. By the third day, I was a mess, exhausted, jumpy, paranoid. I hadn't seen the figure again, but I could feel it following me, watching. The forest, once my refuge, had become a prison. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how fast I walked, no matter how deep I went, it was always just behind me, waiting. That afternoon, I found more footprints. This time, they were right outside my tent, circling it in strange, looping patterns. There were dozens of them, overlapping, almost chaotic, as if someone or something had danced around the camp all night. My heart raced as I traced the tracks, panic creeping into my bones. The final straw came that evening. I was sitting by the fire, trying to calm my nerves when I heard it again. The soft, whispering voice carried on the wind. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of the trees, but I could make out one thing clearly. It was my name. Nate. I shot to my feet, spinning around, scanning the darkened woods for any sign of movement. The voice called again, softer this time, but closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, stuffed it into my pack as fast as I could, heart pounding in my ears. I needed to leave now. Whatever was out there, whatever had been stalking me for days, wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. As I slung my pack over my shoulder and reached for my rifle, I felt it, a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing at the edge of the firelight, was the figure, tall, twisted, with limbs too long and eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Its face was pale and gaunt, hollow eyes staring into me as if it could see straight through my skin and into my soul. I raised the rifle, but before I could pull the trigger, it vanished, just gone, like smoke dissolving into the night air. I ran. I didn't care about the trail, didn't care about my gear. I ran as fast as I could through the forest, branches slapping at my face, rocks and roots tripping me up as I sprinted blindly through the trees. I could hear it behind me, the soft crunch of footsteps following, never far behind. By the time I reached the trailhead, my lungs were burning, my legs felt like jelly, and my mind was racing with fear. I threw myself into the truck, slamming the door shut. The silence inside the cab was deafening. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, finally starting the engine and peeling out of there as fast as I could. Even now, weeks later, I can't get it out of my head. The figure, those eyes, the voice that called my name, luring me deeper into the woods. I haven't told anyone about it. No one would believe me anyway. Just another man who got lost in the forest, right? But I know what I saw. I know what was out there. I haven't been back to the mountain since, and every time I close my eyes, I still see it. Watching. Waiting. It all started with a bet. My older brother Jonah had always been the reckless one, daring me to do things I wouldn't normally consider. This time, it was a challenge to hike up to the old fire lookout in the Ojai Mountains. He had stumbled upon it a few years back and had always talked about the eerie abandoned lookout high up in the hills, where the trails were almost non-existent. But Jonah wasn't around anymore to see me take on the challenge. He'd gone missing on one of his infamous solo trips to Alaska last year. They never found his body, just his empty canoe drifting in the currents. I wasn't doing it just to prove something to myself, though. I was doing it to close a chapter, to get rid of that nagging voice in my head that kept whispering Jonah's name whenever I looked up at the mountains. So I packed my gear, left the comfort of my small apartment in Boise, and drove south, heading deep into the Ojai. The Ojai Mountains aren't exactly what you'd call friendly terrain. There are no marked trails, no park rangers patrolling the area. It's raw, untamed land. Vast stretches of sagebrush, craggy cliffs, and deep canyons that could swallow you whole. The air here smells like dust and wild, sun-baked earth, the kind that gets into your clothes and stays with you for days. I parked my truck at the edge of what could barely be called a trailhead, just a dirt pull-off on a forgotten road. From there, I set out on foot, the lookout visible as a speck on the horizon. The hike was grueling, the kind of trek that makes you question your sanity halfway through. But there was something about that old lookout, something that drew me in, a sense of unfinished business that only this hike could resolve. It took the better part of the day to reach the lookout. By the time I got there, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the mountains. The lookout itself was a relic from another time, wooden, with glass windows that had long since shattered and a roof that sagged in the middle. It sat perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the vast emptiness of the Oi wilderness. Inside, the floorboards creaked under my weight, and I could see old, faded maps of the area pinned to the walls, along with a few rusted tools left behind by whoever had manned this place. As I stood there catching my breath, I thought about Jonah. He would have loved this, the wildness of it all, the isolation. And yet there was something else too, something that made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the wind howling through the broken windows, or the fact that this place seemed untouched for decades, yet felt strangely lived in, like someone had just stepped out and would be back any minute. The feeling only grew stronger as night began to fall. I set up my camp just outside the lookout, not wanting to spend the night inside that decrepit structure. I built a small fire and cooked a quick meal, but the air had a weight to it that made the food taste like dust. The stars came out in full force, the kind of clear night sky you only get out in the middle of nowhere. But even the beauty of the stars couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my gut. Then came the sound. At first it was just a whisper, like the wind moving through the sagebrush. But then it grew louder, a sort of low vibrating hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood up, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing, just the endless night and the occasional rustle of the wind. I told myself it was just the wind, that the mountains had a way of playing tricks on you when you were alone. But deep down, I knew better. The hum wasn't natural. It was something else. Something alive. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it around, but the light only pierced a few feet into the inky blackness. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse at first. Something large moving between the trees, far off in the distance. I'd like to say I was brave, that I stood my ground and faced whatever it was. But the truth is, my legs started moving before I even realized it. I stumbled back toward the lookout, the flashlight beam shaking wildly in my hand. The hum grew louder, almost a low rumble now, and I could hear something crashing through the brush, heading straight for me. I bolted for the lookout, slamming the door behind me and throwing my weight against it. Whatever was out there, it was big, bigger than any animal I had ever encountered. I could hear it breathing now, a wet, rasping sound, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It circled the lookout, its heavy footfalls thudding against the rocky ground. I held my breath, trying to keep as still as possible. The creature's outline loomed against the broken windows, its shape distorted by the moonlight. It was hunched, its shoulders massive, with limbs that seemed too long for its body, dragging behind it as it moved. I caught a glimpse of its face, long and gaunt, with skin stretched tight over bone, like some kind of twisted version of a wolf or a bear, but neither. Its mouth was lined with uneven, jagged teeth, and when it breathed, a foul, rotting smell filled the room. I don't know how long I stayed like that, pressed against the door, barely breathing. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes feeling like hours, as the creature prowled outside, testing the walls, sniffing the air. I thought of Jonah, alone out there in the Alaskan wilderness, and wondered if this was what he had faced in his final moments. Something primal. Something that didn't belong in our world. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature seemed to lose interest. I heard it shuffle away, its footfalls fading into the night. I waited, counting to 100 before I dared move, listening intently for any sign of its return. But the only sound was the wind and the distant cry of an owl. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the lookout, my back to the wall, flashlight clutched in one hand, my knife in the other. When the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I finally moved, peeking out through the broken windows. The ground outside was disturbed, claw marks gouged into the dirt, but there was no sign of the creature. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the straps of my pack. The hike back to the truck was a blur, the only thought in my mind, to put as much distance between me and that lookout as possible. The hum had stopped, replaced by the sounds of the waking forest, but I could still feel it, a vibration deep in my bones. When I finally reached the truck, I threw my pack in the back and peeled out of there, the tires kicking up dust as I sped down the dirt road. I didn't stop until I was back in Boise, the familiar sights of the city bringing some semblance of normalcy back into my life. The claw marks in the dirt, the creature's breath, the unnatural hum, it was all real. But I never went back to the Ojai Mountains, never even spoke of it to anyone. I didn't need to. Jonah was gone, and whatever I had encountered up there was a part of those mountains, something that belonged to them and them alone. And that's where I left it. I never wanted to take the job, not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to, even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again, Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened, and saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare, unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. I never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward, keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going gray, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough, or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the route. Route 163 through the heart of Monument Valley and then up through Dead Man's Pass. It's the very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rocks stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first, static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back but steady, like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago, no reason they should be failing. Then, the engine sputtered, just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be. Of course, Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same, and it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheels slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life and a voice broke through the static. "Rusty, Hank, you got to stop." I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. "Eddie," I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew louder, swallowed by the hiss of static. "Rusty, you gotta stop. You can't make the same mistake." I was losing my mind. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. "Damn it!" I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time, I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking, and then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered, and standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there, as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, but it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see Eddie. My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. How are you?" He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then slowly he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it, the wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. "No," I whispered. This can't be real." Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. "You gotta stop, Rusty. You gotta stop running." I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. "I'm sorry," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped." The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment it sounded like Eddie was speaking again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. "I never blamed you, Rusty," his voice whispered softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. "But you got to forgive yourself." The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon, and then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still, the only sound, the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady, as I pulled back onto the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled a sad, tired smile. It was time to stop running, time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, enjoying the silence for hours, but now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite, deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life, birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique one I'd brought along to mess around with during my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing. Until now. I stood up from the fire, walking over to the RV and ducking inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice. Faint and garbled, speaking numbers 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere. Maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing, I was sure. But the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong, like the message wasn't for just anyone, like it was for me. I shut the radio off, my fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods, the towering pines looming overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, made me uneasy. I stepped back outside, trying to push the growing sense of unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. I heard it too. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal." "The numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals, glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes, that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 137. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes were constantly scanning the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here. Something I couldn't explain. You think it's some kind of broadcast? I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. I don't think it's a broadcast at all. What do you mean? He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. I think it's a warning or a signal from something out there. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A warning from what? Before I could ask more, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. Then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. We see you. My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. What the hell was that? He whispered. I could barely whisper back, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. We see you. The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. We see you. I stood up, flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy like the atmosphere itself was alive. I think we should leave, Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once, I agreed. The next morning I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no note. Just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles, the battery draining faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 137. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, an old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. My heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal, a small glowing device, pulsing with an eerie, cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices all crashed into me at once in an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower, as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, as if something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV. The lights followed me, the clicking never far behind. But I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper. Even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror, it didn't stop. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them. 137. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. My name is Tony Weathers, and what I'm about to tell you happened a few summers back at Camp Pine Ridge, somewhere between 2010 and 2015. I'm a high school teacher, so my summer breaks are precious. I usually spend them in the mountains or by the sea, just relaxing and unwinding. But that particular year, I decided to volunteer as a counselor at my old summer camp. Part nostalgia, part giving back, you know? I figured it would be a great way to recharge before the school year started again. Camp Pine Ridge is nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, a good couple of hours from the nearest town. It's your typical summer camp with wooden cabins, a crystal clear lake, and a mess hall that always smells like burnt toast and bacon grease. The kids are your usual mix of excited and homesick and license to try it. And the counselors, mostly college kids, try their best to keep the energy high. It was a warm afternoon when things started to go south. I was in charge of a group of 12-year-old boys, mostly, and we were prepping for the big overnight hike, something the kids looked forward to all week. My co-counselor Maria was bustling around, making sure everyone had their gear. She's a small-town girl with a heart of gold, and the kids loved her. "Hey, Tony, you got a minute?" Maria called out, waving me over. "Sure, what's up?" I replied, making my way across the mess hall. "We're missing a couple of sleeping bags. Can you check the storage shed for me?" "On it," I said, nodding. "Maybe the raccoons made off with them again?" Maria laughed, shaking her head. "Let's hope not. Those things aren't cheap." I walked out, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. The storage shed was a bit of a hike from the main camp area, down a narrow tree-lined path. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Not a good sign. I pushed it open. The hinges creaked in protest. Inside, it was dim, and the familiar smell of old canvas and mothballs greeted me. I rummaged around, checking the shelves and bins. I found the missing sleeping bag stuffed in a corner. As I was about to leave, something caught my eye in the far corner behind some old equipment, a small, leather-bound notebook. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up. The pages were yellow with age, and the handwriting was neat and precise. It looked like journal entries dating back to the 70s. Most of it was mundane stuff, notes about camp activities and maintenance logs. But then I stumbled upon something strange. There were mentions of kids disappearing, notes about searching the woods, and cryptic references to the Watcher. A chill ran down my spine as I read through the entries. It seemed like every few years, a kid would vanish without a trace. The camp staff would search, calling the authorities, but nothing ever came of it. The entries stopped abruptly in the mid-'80s. I shoved the notebook into my backpack, my mind racing with questions. I hurried back to the mess hall, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. Maria looked up as I entered, a relieved smile on her face. "Found them," I said, holding up the sleeping bags. "Great, thanks, Tony," she replied. "The kids are getting antsy. We should get going soon." We rounded up the kids and set off on our hike. The trail wound through dense forest, the canopy above casting dappled shadows on the ground. The kids chattered excitedly, oblivious to the gnawing worry in the pit of my stomach. I tried to push the journal out of my mind, focusing on the task at hand. As night fell, we reached the clearing where we'd set up camp. The kids set about pitching their tents and gathering firewood, their laughter echoing through the trees. Maria and I supervised, making sure everyone was settled. After dinner, we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. The kids loved it, their eyes wide with excitement and a touch of fear. I glanced around. Shadows danced in the flickering firelight. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Eventually, the kids settled down for the night, their laughter giving way to soft snores. Maria and I sat by the dying embers of the fire, the night air cool and still. "Tony, you okay?" Maria asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "Yeah, just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "Long day, you know?" She nodded, stifling a yawn. "Tell me about it. I'm gonna hit the sack. You should too." "I'll stay up a bit longer," I said. "Make sure the fire's completely out." "All right, good. Good night, Hank." "And night, Maria." I sat there for a while, staring into the embers, the journal's words echoing in my mind. Disappearances, the Watcher. It all seemed so surreal. Just as I was about to head to my tent, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart skipped a beat and I grabbed my flashlight, shining it towards the sound. "Probably just a raccoon," I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm. But then I saw him. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing at the edge of the clearing. His clothes were tattered, his face obscured by the shadows. He just stood there, watching. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. I wasn't about to let some creep scare us. I took a step forward, flashlight in hand. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice stronger this time. The figure turned and disappeared into the woods. I hesitated for a moment, then followed. I wasn't thinking straight, just reacting. The underbrush scratched at my legs and the beam of the flashlight bounced wildly. I lost sight of him but kept going, determined to find out who he was. The woods were eerily silent, the only sound my ragged breathing. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into a small clearing. The moonlight illuminated the scene and my blood ran cold. There, in the middle of the clearing, was a makeshift camp. Tattered tents, old sleeping bags, and scattered belongings. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. I took a step closer, my flashlight sweeping over the scene, and then I saw them. Bones. Human bones, half buried in the dirt. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sick joke. I turned to run, but something caught my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. The same gaunt figure from before. I froze, my heart pounding. He took a step forward, and I saw his face for the first time. Pale, gaunt eyes, hollow and empty. He looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. He smiled, a twisted, grotesque smile that sent a wave of terror through me. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I turned and ran, branches whipping at my face, the flashlight barely lighting my way. I stumbled back into our campsite, gasping for breath. "Maria, wake up!" I shouted, shaking her tent. She emerged, blurry-eyed and confused. "Tony, what's going on?" "We have to get the kids," I said, my voice shaking. "No, we need to leave." "What? Why?" she asked, but the urgency in my voice must have convinced her. We hurriedly woke the kids, telling them to pack up. They protested, groggy and disoriented, but we didn't have time to explain. As we gathered the last of our things, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, approaching the campsite. My heart pounded, and I turned to see him again. The gaunt figure, now closer, back his smile wider. "Run!" I shouted, pushing the kids ahead of me. We bolted down the trail, not daring to look back. The kids stumbled and cried, but we kept moving, the figure's footsteps echoing behind us. We burst out of the woods into the open area near the main camp. I didn't stop until we reached the mess hall, slamming the door behind us. The kids huddled together, scared and confused. Maria and I tried to catch our breath, our minds racing. "What the hell was that?" Maria asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, shaking my head. "But we're not safe here. We need to call for help." I grabbed the camp's emergency phone and dialed 911, my hand shaking. The operator's calm voice was a stark contrast to the panic I felt. "911, what's your emergency?" "We're at Camp Pine Ridge," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's someone out here stalking us. We need help." "Stay where you are," the operator replied. "Officers are on their way." We waited, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. The kids were terrified. Maria did her best to comfort them. I kept an eye on the windows, half expecting the gaunt figure to appear at any moment. Finally, we heard sirens in the distance. A few minutes later, police cars pulled up outside the mess hall. Officers rushed in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Everyone okay?" one of the officers asked. "Yes, but there's someone out there," I said, my voice shaking. "In the woods, we saw him." The officers exchanged glances, then nodded. "We'll check it out. Stay here and lock the doors." They headed into the woods, their flashlights bobbing in the darkness. We huddled together, waiting, the tension thick in the air. After what felt like an eternity, the officers returned, their faces grim. "We found an old campsite," one of them said. "And some bones. Looks like they've been there a while, but no sign of anyone else." I felt a chill run down my spine. The gaunt figure, the bones, the disappearances. It all seemed too real, too horrifying. The officers took our statements, promising to investigate further. They escorted us back to our cabins, making sure we were safe for the night. The next morning, the camp was abuzz with news of the previous night's events. The kids were scared, the counselors on edge. The camp director decided to cut the session short, sending everyone home early. It was a relief, but the unease lingered. A few weeks later, I got a call from the police. They'd investigated the old campsite, identifying the remains as those of several missing kids from the 70s and 80s. They also found the journal I had discovered, using it to piece together a chilling history of disappearances at the camp. But there was no sign of the gaunt figure, no clues as to who he was or where he came from. The police concluded that he was likely responsible for the disappearances, but without any concrete evidence, the case remained unsolved. I tried to move on, returning to my life as a teacher, but the memories of that night haunted me. I couldn't shake the image of the gaunt figure, his hollow eyes and twisted smile. I stopped going back to Camp Pine Ridge, the place that had once been a haven of childhood memories, now tainted by fear and darkness. Years passed, and life went on. But every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow in the woods, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the light, and I'd remember that summer. The night that changed everything. The camp eventually closed down, the legend of the disappearances and the gaunt figure becoming local folklore. People would whisper about it, telling ghost stories around campfires, never knowing the full truth. But I knew. I lived it, and I know deep down that somewhere out there, he's still watching. I've always liked the quiet of the road. No one asking questions, no one poking into your business, just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul, just endless desert dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit. The kind of tired that sneaks up on you where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally, I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. I felt a wave of relief when I stood the weathered sign for a rest stop, 2 miles ahead. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled in around me, pressing through the windows. I leaned back in the driver's seat, rubbing my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent, dry, with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff. No names or crude drawings. These were symbols, spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me harder inside, stronger than before. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols, dozens of them, carved into the tiles, drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, a man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, trying to decide if I should just get back in the truck and go. But the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed something cold. Too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone, just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing. They, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd driven across the country dozens of times, stopped in every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second, I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through. Low, distorted. Frank. My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. Who is this? Silence. I stared at the radio, back waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still, that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now, standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. Come on, I muttered, trying to stay calm. Don't do this to me now. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, no bars, no nothing. The figure was still there, closer now. Another figure appeared near the picnic table, and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach, but they were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone. Just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared. Every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out. Out of here, on foot, if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat just in case and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else on the side of my truck. Etched into the paint was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restroom, and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building, the carvings and scratches now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. Frank. I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there. No figures, no man in the coat, just the voice, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Frank, you need to stay. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it. Low, urgent voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand, but they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices. I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing. I had to leave now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab, and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest stop disappeared in the rearview mirror, the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered, and I knew deep down that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Route 50 anymore, not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. I thought I knew isolation. I'd spent years driving across the country chasing celestial events, camping in places no one else dared to go. Black Rock Desert was supposed to be no different. I'd chosen this spot because it was one of the darkest places in the United States, far from the light pollution of cities, with nothing but the stars above and the cracked earth below, a perfect place to watch the meteor shower I'd been anticipating for months. But the desert has a way of getting under your skin. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun blazing high, its rays bouncing off the endless white of the salt flats. The ground stretched out in every direction, flat and featureless, interrupted only by distant mountains rising like ghosts on the horizon. It was beautiful in a desolate way, the kind of place that makes you feel small and insignificant. Exactly what I needed. The RV's engine rumbled to a stop, kicking up dust as I parked. I opened the door, stepping into the dry, hot air. The silence was immediate. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of civilization. Just a profound, almost oppressive stillness. I told myself it was peaceful, that this was what I wanted. A few days alone in the desert to focus on my photography and watch the night sky. But as I looked out over the vast expanse of cracked earth, a strange feeling settled in my chest, like a weight pressing down. I brushed it off. It had been a long drive, and the heat was getting to me. I'd feel better once the sun went down. I spent the first few hours setting up camp, adjusting my telescope, and testing my camera equipment. The sky was still a blazing blue, but the desert's unforgiving heat was beginning to fade, replaced by a sharp chill as the sun sank lower. By the time dusk arrived, the temperature had plummeted, and I retreated into the RV to grab a jacket before stepping back outside. That's when the radio first crackled to life. I'd brought my old ham radio along, hoping to catch some weather updates or maybe listen in on local astronomy broadcasts. I hadn't expected much out here, but the static-filled hum surprised me. I turned the dial, searching for a signal, and for a moment I thought I'd found one, a faint voice cutting through the static. "Don't stay." I froze. The words were barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind, but they were unmistakable. I leaned closer, adjusting the frequency, but the voice was gone, replaced by the familiar hiss of static. I turned the radio off, chalking it up to interference, old equipment, or weird atmosphere. Still, the unease in my chest was growing. The first night was incredible. The sky came alive with meteors streaking across the blackness, more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. I stood in awe, snapping pictures, adjusting my telescope, completely losing track of time. Out here, under the stars, the rest of the world felt far away. It was just me, the night, and the vastness of space. And yet something nagged at me. When I reviewed the photos later, I noticed something strange in the background of one of my long exposure shots. There was a blur, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge. At first, I thought it was a mistake, dust on the lens maybe, or a glitch in the camera's settings. But as I scrolled through the rest of the images, the blur appeared again and again in each photo. It seemed to be getting closer to the RV. I wiped the camera lens, took another shot, and stared hard at the screen. Nothing. It had to be some kind of artifact from the desert air, the heat mixing with the cold night, playing tricks on the lens. Still, the feeling in my chest tightened. I turned in early, trying to push the unease aside, telling myself I'd check the equipment in the morning. Day 2 was different. I woke to a stifling heat that even the RV's air conditioning couldn't seem to fight. I cursed, fiddling with the controls, but the air blowing through the vents was weak and warm. I grabbed a bottle of water and stepped outside, hoping the breeze would provide some relief, but the air was dead still as the grave. I spent most of the day trying to fix the RV's engine, which had been acting sluggish since I arrived. I knew I should be enjoying the desert, but the more time I spent out there, the more the silence started to gnaw at me. It wasn't the peaceful isolation I had expected. It felt watchful. As the day dragged on, the sun beat down, turning the ground beneath my feet into a furnace. The radio, which had been quiet since Light's strange transmission, crackled to life again. This time, the voice was clearer. "Danger. You need to leave." I dropped the wrench I was holding, staring at the radio in disbelief. The voice was faint, distorted, like it was coming from miles away, but it was unmistakable. Someone or something was speaking to me. I snatched up the radio, twisting the dial, trying to find the source. Static. Nothing but static. The voice was gone again, leaving me standing in the middle of the desert, sweat running down my back, my heart hammering in my chest. I should have left then. I should have packed up and driven out of there. But the RV's engine was still stalling, and part of me didn't want to admit that I was spooked. This was why I came out here, wasn't it? To face my fears, to be alone, in the dark. I stayed. And that night, the shadows came. The meteor shower was more intense on the second night, the sky alive with fire and light. I sat by the RV, staring up at the heavens, the vastness of the universe, overwhelming. But no matter how beautiful the stars were, my eyes kept drifting back to the edges of the desert, where the darkness seemed to pool, thick and impenetrable. It was there, at the far edge of my vision, that I first saw the figure. A shape, standing just beyond the reach of my campfire's light. At first, I thought it was a trick of the eye. The desert plays with your perception. Distances blur, shadows stretch. But when I blinked, the figure was still there, standing, watching. I grabbed my camera, adjusting the focus, snapping a shot before the figure disappeared. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe an animal or even another camper who'd wandered too close. But when I checked the camera's screen, my blood went cold. The figure wasn't human. It was tall, too tall, with elongated limbs and a strange, distorted form. It was like a shadow brought to life, a smear of darkness against the starlit sky. The more I stared at it, the more unreal it looked. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I slowly lowered the camera. When I looked again, the figure was gone. The air was suddenly freezing, the kind of cold that bites at your skin. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me, my heart racing. I told myself I was imagining things. The desert played tricks on people. I'd read about it. People seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices carried on the wind, but that didn't explain the figure in the photo. The night dragged on, and I stayed awake, listening for anything, any sound, any movement. But all I heard was the persistent hum of the radio and the static growing louder by the minute. The next day I knew I had to leave. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just my imagination. The figure, the voices, I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I packed up as quickly as I could, but when I turned the key in the ignition, the RV sputtered and died. I tried again and again. Nothing. I stepped out into the desert, sweat pouring down my face. The heat was oppressive, and the silence pressed in on me, suffocating. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal, and the radio was useless. Just a constant, garbled stream of static. Then the voice returned, louder than ever. Stay. Come closer. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. And when I looked out across the desert, I saw the figure again. Closer this time, standing in the distance. Its form was hazy and indistinct, but unmistakable. It was waiting for me. My legs felt like lead as I backed toward the RV, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air was freezing now, the warmth of the day gone, replaced by a bone-deep chill. I knew in that moment that if I stayed, I would become like the figure, a shadow, a ghost, trapped in this forsaken place, wandering the desert forever. I ran. I don't know how I got the RV started. Maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe sheer panic. But when the engine finally roared to life, I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't look back. The figure, the voice, the cold. They all faded into the distance as I sped across the salt flats, the desert stretching endlessly behind me. I never looked at the photos again. I couldn't. Whatever was out there, it was better left unseen. I'll never return to Black Rock Desert. Some places were meant to be empty. My name is Sierra Gonzalez, and back in 2020, I took my RV up to Thunder Bay, Ontario for what I thought would be a relaxing getaway. I've always been a fan of the open road, a bit of a nomad, I guess. After years of crunching numbers as an accountant, I figured I deserved a little adventure. Plus, my friends joked that my midlife crisis was overdue, so why not embrace it? I arrived at a secluded campground nestled by Lake Superior, the kind of place where your nearest neighbor is a curious squirrel eyeing your trail mix. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine was a welcome change from the city's exhaust fumes. I parked my RV, which I affectionately called the Beast, not because it was big or fast, but because parallel parking it was a monstrous task. After setting up camp, I decided to explore the area. I grabbed my hiking boots, a map, and a granola bar, because nothing says outdoorsman like processed oats and honey. As I walked through the dense forest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The rustling leaves and distant bird calls were a symphony compared to the office's incessant keyboard clacking. About an hour into my hike, I stumbled upon another campsite. It was deserted, but signs of recent activity were evident. A smoldering fire pit, a half-pitched tent, and a cooler left open with contents strewn about. Someone had a wild night, I mused. Maybe they were the type to start partying and forget the cleanup, a kindred spirit in that regard. I continued on, but something gnawed at me. Leaving a cooler open in the bare country was like leaving free samples at a supermarket. It attracted all kinds. I shrugged it off, convincing myself that the campers would return soon. Besides, who was I to judge? I've left my fair share of dishes in the sink. As dusk approached, I made my way back to the beast. The sky painted hues of orange and purple, and the lake mirrored the colors beautifully. I set up a small fire and roasted a couple of hot dogs, gourmet dining at its finest. Just as I was about to take a bite, I heard rustling behind me. Looking to share, I called out, half expecting a deer or maybe that nosy squirrel. Instead, a man stepped out from the shadows. He was tall and lean, with unkempt hair and clothes that had seen better days. His eyes darted around nervously. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice raspy. "No worries," I replied, offering a friendly smile. "Hot dog?" I gestured to the spare one. He hesitated before nodding. "Thanks." We sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire filling the void. "Name's Sierra," I said, extending my hand. He looked at it for a second before shaking it firmly. "I'm Jack." "So Jack, camping around here?" I asked. He glanced over his shoulder before replying, "Something like that." I sensed he wasn't much for small talk, but awkward silences were my arch nemesis. "Beautiful night, isn't it? Stars are supposed to be extra bright tonight," I added. He didn't respond, instead focusing intently on the fire. I noticed his hands were dirty, and there was a dark stain on his sleeve. Maybe he was a hiker who'd taken a tumble. "You okay? Need any help or supplies?" I asked. He snapped his head toward me, eyes wide. "Why would you ask that?" I raised my hands defensively. "Just being neighborly. You look like you've had a rough day." He stood up abruptly. "I should go." "All right, then," I said, a bit taken aback. "Stay safe out there." Jack disappeared into the woods as suddenly as he'd appeared. I shrugged it off. People come to the wilderness for all sorts of reasons. Maybe he was searching for solitude like me, or perhaps he just didn't appreciate my hot dog recipe. The next morning, I decided to check out a nearby waterfall that the campground manager had recommended. On my way, I passed the same campsite from before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached it. The tent was still half-pitched, and the cooler remained open. This time, however, I noticed something I hadn't before. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, stained dark red. A chill ran down my spine, not the good kind you get from a cold beer on a hot day. "Maybe it's paint," I whispered to myself, though I wasn't convinced. I took a photo with my phone, proof that I wasn't imagining things. Continuing to the waterfall seemed less appealing now, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Perhaps someone had an accident and went for help. I decided to head to the campground office to report what I found. As I made my way back, the forest seemed denser, the shadows longer. Every rustle made me hyper-aware of my surroundings. "Get a grip, Sierra," I muttered. "You've watched one too many crime shows." Back at the office, I found the manager, an older gentleman named Pete, sipping coffee. "Morning, Pete," I greeted. "Morning, Sierra. How's the camping treating you?" Great, I lied. "Hey, I came across a campsite that's been abandoned for at least a day. Looks like someone left in a hurry. Thought you should know." Pete frowned. "Whereabouts?" I described the location, and his frown deepened. "We don't have any registered campers in that area. Maybe they arrived late and plan to register today." He shook his head. "Possible, but unlikely. I'll go check it out." "Mind if I tag along?" I asked, not wanting to sit alone with my overactive imagination. "Sure thing." We drove in his utility vehicle, and I felt a bit more at ease with company. When we arrived, Pete examined the site carefully. "Doesn't look right," he mumbled. I showed him the torn fabric. "Found this earlier." He inspected it, his face growing stern. "Stay here," he instructed before I could protest. He ventured into the woods beyond the campsite. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, he returned, his face pale. "We need to head back," he said briskly. "What's going on?" I pressed. He hesitated, found some disturbing signs. "Looks like there might have been an attack." "An attack? By what? A bear?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Could be," he replied, not meeting my eyes. Back at the office, Pete radioed the local authorities. I overheard snippets, possible missing persons, evidence of struggle, needs immediate attention. I decided to return to my RV, feeling uneasy as I walked. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The trees seemed to close in, and the forest was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. "Get a grip, Sierra," I muttered. "You've watched one too many crime shows." Reaching the beast, I locked the doors and drew the blinds. "So much for a relaxing getaway," I sighed. To distract myself, I pulled out a book, a thriller about a detective hunting a serial killer. Maybe not the best choice, I chuckled, opting for a cheesy romance novel instead. Night fell, and sleep eluded me. Around midnight, a faint knock echoed from the RV door. I froze. "Probably just the wind," I whispered. The knock came again, more insistent. Gathering my courage, I approached the door. "Who's there?" I called out. No response. I grabbed a flashlight and, against my better judgment, opened the door a crack. Darkness greeted me. "Hello?" A figure lurched forward, and I stumbled back. It was a woman, her face bruised, clothes torn. "Help me," she gasped before collapsing at my feet. "Oh my God," I exclaimed, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" She clutched my arm with surprising strength. "He's coming," she whispered. "Who's coming?" Before she could answer, rustling sounded from the woods. Panic surged through me. I pulled her inside and locked the door. My hands shook. "Stay here," I instructed, though I had no idea what I was doing. I searched for my phone to call for help, but realized I had no signal. Of course, I muttered, great timing for technology to fail me. The woman was fading in and out of consciousness. I tended to her wounds as best I could using my limited first aid knowledge. "Hang in there," I urged. A loud thud shook the RV, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Someone or something was outside. I braced myself, skillet in hand. "Time's up, Sierra," he hissed. The door gave way, and Jack lunged inside. His eyes were wild, and he brandished a hunting knife, stained dark. I swung the skillet with all my might, connecting with his forearm. He yelped, dropping the knife. "You little," he snarled. I didn't let him finish. I tackled him, channeling every football game I'd ever watched. We both tumbled out of the RV, hitting the ground hard. He recovered quickly, grappling with me. "You should have stayed down," he growled. "Sorry to disappoint," I retorted, struggling against his grip. Out of nowhere, Pete appeared, wielding a shotgun. "Freeze," he commanded. Jack hesitated, giving me the opening to break free. Pete advanced, weapon steady. "It's over, Jack." Jack smirked. "You think this ends with me?" Before Pete could respond, Jack lunged at him. A shot rang out, and Jack fell to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Sirens echoed in the distance. Police were arriving. Relief washed over me. The authorities took over, securing Jack and tending to the injured woman, whose name I learned was Lisa. She was a camper who'd gone missing 2 days prior. As statements were taken and evidence collected, I sat on the steps of the beast, exhaustion hitting me. Pete approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Sierra. Didn't feel like it," I admitted. "Who is he?" Pete sighed. "Name's Jackson Reed, wanted for multiple assaults across the province. We had reports he might be in the area, but nothing concrete." "Well, he's concrete now," I quipped, nodding toward the police car where Jackson sat, cut and scowling. Pete managed a small smile. "Guess so." In the final moments before the police left, I caught Jackson's gaze. His eyes were cold, devoid of remorse. But he was caught, and that was what mattered. I decided it was time to pack up and head home. Adventure achieved, though not the kind I'd anticipated. As I drove away from Thunder Bay, the sunrise painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, a stark contrast to the night's darkness. And as for Jackson Reed, his reign of terror had ended where he least expected, thwarted by an accountant wielding a skillet. The road wound through the dense trees, snaking deeper into the heart of the low national forest. The thick canopy above allowed only sparse sunlight to filter through, casting shadows across the narrow dirt road. I gripped the steering wheel of my RV, trying to shake off the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. It had been 3 hours since I'd passed another vehicle. Solitude was the whole point, wasn't it? This trip was supposed to help me clear my head, to reconnect with myself after the divorce. I had spent the last few months in a fog, and this trip to Deadwood Creek was meant to be my escape, a test of independence. No ex-husband, no stress, just me in the wilderness. I needed this. At least that's what I'd been telling myself for the past 2 weeks. Deadwood Creek Campground wasn't listed on any mainstream maps, just a blip on an obscure site for hardcore campers who sought isolation. The campground had a reputation, but that was part of the appeal. I needed remote quiet, far away from anything that reminded me of what I'd left behind. But as I pulled into the clearing, past the sign half buried in moss that read Deadwood Creek, a shiver ran through me. The place was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that makes you second-guess your decision to be alone. I parked the RV near a small trickling creek. The only other vehicle was an old, beat-up camper a short distance away, nestled under the towering pines. It was empty. No sign of movement, no campfire. Good. I wasn't in the mood for socializing. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air and surveyed the site. The woods were thick, ancient. The ground was littered with pine needles, muffling the sound of my footsteps. A perfect retreat. I set up camp, unfolding my chair and setting my mug of tea beside me as I sat by the creek, listening to the soft gurgle of the water. It was peaceful, just as I'd hoped. But after a while, the peace felt off. Too still. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was oppressive. My mind wandered back to the stories I'd read online, the rumors about Deadwood Creek's dark chap. This used to be a mining settlement during the gold rush, or so the tale went. Dozens of men had come to find their fortunes, but most found only death. Mysterious disappearances, bodies never recovered. Some say the men still haunt the place, bound to the land, working their endless shifts beneath the earth. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. But now, sitting alone in the fading light, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The wind rustled the trees, and I jumped at the sound. Get it together, Hannah, I thought, rolling my eyes at my own nerves. I hadn't come all this way just to scare myself into leaving. That's when I saw him. A man standing near the edge of the campground, just at the tree line, leaning against a tree. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a scruffy beard, his clothes worn and dirty as if he'd been out here for weeks. His gaze was fixed on me. I waved awkwardly, and he lifted a hand in response before slowly walking over. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said, his voice easy, almost too casual. "Didn't expect anyone else out here this late in the season." "I wasn't expecting anyone either," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some time alone, you know." "Yeah, I get that," he chuckled, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Rick, by the way. Been coming here for years." I nodded, unsure what to say. Rick had the look of someone who belonged out here, who knew the woods like the back of his hand. I didn't. "Be careful out here," Rick said after a pause, his gaze drifting toward the woods. "Deadwood Creek's got a heat chap. Strange things happen when the sun goes down." My skin prickled at his words, but I forced myself to laugh. "Let me guess. Ghost stories? Miners and all that?" Rick's expression didn't change. "Something like that. Just don't stray too far from your camp." He turned and walked back to his camper without another word, leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV was quiet, the temperature inside dropping faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Then the sound started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but soon I realized it was more than that. Faint at first, barely perceptible, a rhythmic clinking echoed from the direction of the creek. It sounded like tools, mining tools, pickaxes striking rock. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. No, I was just imagining it. This was what I came here for. Solitude. But I couldn't shake the sound. It was getting louder, the metallic rhythm persistent, almost like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed out of the RV, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was a wall of darkness, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The sound of the creek was louder now, rushing over rocks, and I could swear I heard voices, whispers carried on the wind. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, catching nothing but trees and the faint shimmer of water. But then I saw them. Figures. shadowy, half-formed shapes moving by the creek, their outlines faint but unmistakably human. They moved like they were working, digging, swinging pickaxes in time with the clinking sound. My throat tightened as I realized they weren't there in the normal sense. They were translucent, faded. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Ghosts? No, that was impossible. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing, but as I turned, I nearly collided with Rick. "Easy," he said, raising his hands. "I saw your light. Thought I'd come check on you." I couldn't find the words to explain what I'd just seen, but Rick didn't need me to. He just looked over at the creek and nodded, his face unreadable. "They come out at night, the miners. Been here for over a century, trapped in their own hell." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic. "You mean you know about this? What is this place?" Rick gave a half smile, though it was more sad than comforting. "Deadwood Creek. These men came here to find gold, but all they found was death. Now they're stuck here working the land forever. Some nights they're just echoes, other nights..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. On other nights, they weren't just echoes. We thought we knew the Ozarks. Matt swore up and down that Mark Twain National Forest was a hidden gem. Untouched trails, beautiful vistas, perfect for a 3-day backpacking trip. He was always good at selling these kinds of trips, making it seem like a dream adventure. I believed him mostly because I loved him, but even then, as we parked the car at the trailhead and unloaded our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to be different. "Looks like we're in for some real wilderness this time," Kyle said, flashing a grin. He was already making jokes about getting lost and being eaten by cryptids. Classic Kyle, always trying to lighten the mood. I laughed it off, but something about the dense trees and the isolation made the joke sit heavy in my chest. The forest felt too quiet, too vast. Matt, as usual, was all business. He was adjusting his pack, double-checking the map on his phone. "We'll follow the GPS for most of the way," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "Should be easy. Just a couple of tough climbs, but nothing we can't handle." I glanced at Sarah, who was tightening the straps on her hiking boots. She was always the tough one, competitive, never backing down from a challenge. I liked that about her, but sometimes it felt like she had something to prove, especially when Matt was around. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or rivalry. "Let's get moving," Matt called, waving us on. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." The first day went as expected. We hiked deeper into the forest, leaving behind the marked trails and venturing into the heart of the wilderness. The trees were taller here, their branches heavy with green, creating a canopy that let in only slivers of sunlight. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole, but Matt pressed on, oblivious to the creeping unease that gnawed at me. That night, we set up camp by a small stream. The air was cooler than I expected, a bite of cold that sank into my bones as the sun set. Kyle's tent had a broken pole, something he hadn't noticed until we tried setting it up. He laughed it off, saying he'd just sleep in Sarah's tent, but Matt's frustration was clear. "Next time, check your gear before we leave," Matt snapped, his voice tight. "Relax, man, it's just a tent pole," Kyle said, but the tension between them simmered. I was too tired to deal with their bickering, so I busied myself with starting the fire. Dana, my girlfriend, snapped photos as always, capturing the last glimmers of daylight filtered through the trees. She looked peaceful behind the camera, but I could tell she felt it too, that sense that something was off. That night, we heard the first howl. It was distant at first, almost like the wind moving through the trees, but then it came again, low and deep, rising into a chilling wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "What the hell was that?" Sarah muttered, her hand instinctively moving toward the hatchet strapped to her pack. Matt shrugged, trying to play it off. "Probably just a coyote or something. These woods are full of wildlife." But it didn't sound like any coyote I'd ever heard. I exchanged a glance with Dana, and she raised her eyebrows in that way she did when she didn't believe something. Kyle, of course, took the opportunity to joke. "Sounds like Bigfoot's out there, or maybe the Ozark Howler," he said, his voice teasing. "You guys know that one, right? Big hairy creature, glowing red eyes, hunts hikers for fun." "Knock it off," Matt said sharply. "It's just an animal. Get some sleep. We've got a long hike tomorrow." I tried to brush it off too, but lying in our tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig outside made my heart race. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was restless sleep. The next morning, Dana told me she'd seen something outside the tent, just for a second, but she was sure of it. Red eyes. "I saw red eyes, Matt," she said softly. I laughed nervously, thinking she must have been half asleep. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," I said, though even I didn't believe it. I hadn't told anyone about the dreams I'd had, the sensation of being watched, hunted, like we were intruding on something that didn't want us there. Day 2 was worse. The forest grew denser, the path less defined, and the GPS signal flickered in and out. At one point, we lost it completely. Matt insisted he could still navigate using the map, but the landscape wasn't matching up with anything. The trees felt wrong, closer somehow, like they were moving in on us. The air grew colder, and the silence pressed down like a weight. "We're lost," Sarah said flatly, glaring at Matt. "We're not lost," he snapped back. "I know where we are." But he didn't. None of us did. That night, we found claw marks on the trees, deep gouges, like something had raked through the bark with claws far larger than any animal should have. Dana's hands trembled as she took pictures, but Matt dismissed it. "Could be a bear," he said, though the unease in his voice was obvious. "That's not a bear," Kyle muttered, his earlier joking tone gone. He stared at the claw marks, his face pale. "This is messed up, man. Maybe we should turn back." "We're not turning back," Matt said, his voice rising. "We've come this far. We stick to the plan." The argument that followed was inevitable. Sarah sided with Kyle, saying we were unprepared and it wasn't worth the risk. Dana stayed quiet, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Matt, stubborn as ever, refused to admit we were in over our heads. We set up camp again that night, and the howling returned. This time it was closer, louder, the sound reverberating through the trees like something was circling us. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of those red eyes watching us from the darkness. In the morning, we found more signs, animal carcasses torn apart, strewn across the ground. Deer, mostly, their bodies mangled in ways that didn't make sense. No predator would kill like that. Not for food. It was like something had ripped them apart for fun. Kyle was the first to voice what we were all thinking. "It's the howler, man. I'm telling you, this place is messed up." Matt, as always, refused to believe it. "It's just a predator movie." "There are no wolves in the Ozarks," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Not anymore." We kept moving, but the howls followed us, louder, closer. By late afternoon, we knew we weren't alone. We were being hunted. It was just before dusk when we saw it. We stopped to rest, setting our packs down near a small clearing. That's when Dana froze, her camera slipping from her hands. "Matt," she whispered, "behind you." I turned just in time to see it step out of the trees, hulking, shadowy, with glowing red eyes that burned through the dim light. Its body was massive, covered in thick dark fur, but its shape was wrong, twisted, like something caught between animal and something more. The howl that followed was like nothing I'd ever heard, a deep, guttural sound that shook me to my core. It didn't charge, it didn't attack. It just stood there, watching, as if daring us to move. We didn't. "What the hell is that?" Kyle's voice was barely a whisper, his face drained of color. "It's not real," Matt muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Dana grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "We have to go," she said, her voice trembling now. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, its red eyes glowing brighter. Then, with one last bone-chilling howl, it slipped back into the trees. We didn't wait to see if it would return. We packed up in record time and started moving fast, too fast. The light was fading, and we were stumbling over roots and rocks, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. That night, we didn't set up camp. We just kept walking, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. The howls continued. Closer, always closer. When dawn finally broke, we stumbled upon an old ranger's cabin. Its roof caved in, the windows shattered. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We collapsed inside, too exhausted to keep going. For the first time in hours, the howling stopped. Matt stared at the floor, his face pale, his hands shaking. "It's not real," he whispered over and over again, like a broken record. But we knew better. We had heard it, seen it. The Ozark howler was real, and it had let us live for now. As we sat in that ruined cabin, the forest watching, waiting, I realized we hadn't escaped. Not really. The howler was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. My name is Evans Parker, and I'm 43 years old. I used to think of myself as strong. I spent 20 years in the ER, facing death and chaos every day without flinching. But grief, that's a whole different battlefield. When my husband Mark passed away suddenly last year, I realized how fragile I truly was. That's how I ended up here, traveling alone in my RV, trying to outrun a sorrow that feels like it's chasing me. This happened in late October. I'd been on the road for weeks, crisscrossing West Virginia when I decided to stop at Cooper's Rock State Forest. The park was beautiful, even in the off-season. Cliffs overlooking the Cheat River Gorge, endless pines stretching into the horizon. I thought the solitude would help me clear my head, maybe even spark some peace. But it was the singing pines that caught my attention. I first heard about the grove at the visitor center. A ranger, an older man with a weathered face, handed me a map and said, "Stick to the main trails, don't go wandering toward the singing pines." "Why not?" I asked, curious. He hesitated. "It's just bad luck is all. Folks hear things they shouldn't. Some don't come back." That should have been my first warning, but I'd never been one to shy away from a challenge. The campground was practically deserted when I arrived, which suited me fine. I parked my RV at a site near the edge of the forest, at the closest I could get to the trails. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the occasional groan of the wind through the trees. The first night was uneventful. I cooked a simple dinner on my portable stove and settled in with a book. The cold crept in faster than I expected, but my RV's heater held up. I went to bed early, hoping to wake refreshed for a hike the next day. But sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing faint noises outside, whispers almost, though I told myself it was just the wind. At some point, I must have drifted off because I dreamed of Mark. In the dream, he stood among the trees wearing the same flannel shirt he'd had on the day we met. His smile was warm, familiar. "Evans," he said, reaching out to me. "You found me." I woke up with tears on my cheeks. The clock read 3:47 a.m. The RV felt colder than it should, the heater struggling against the chill outside. The night was impossibly dark. The next morning, I decided to hike toward the singing pines. Ranger's warning be damned. The trail was rugged but manageable, winding through a dense forest of towering evergreens. The air was crisp, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something like hope. The grove wasn't marked on the map, but it wasn't hard to find. As I drew closer, the trees grew taller and thicker, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral. That's when I heard it, the hum. It was faint at first, a low melodic vibration carried on the wind. It didn't sound like birds or insects. It was almost human, like a choir singing in perfect harmony. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, but it made my skin crawl. I pushed on, curiosity overriding caution. The hum grew louder, more distinct, until I stepped into a small clearing. The grove. The pines stood in a perfect circle, their trunks unnaturally straight. At the center was a large, moss-covered stone. The hum stopped the moment I entered. The sudden silence was deafening. I stood frozen, unsure what to do next. That's when I saw the carvings. The bark of each tree was etched with symbols, spirals, runes, and crude shapes that looked almost human. They didn't seem random. They felt deliberate, like a warning. I told myself I was being silly and turned back toward the trail. But as I walked away, I felt it. A presence. A presence. Something was watching me. That night, the hum returned. It wasn't outside this time. It was inside my RV, faint, almost imperceptible, but there. I tried to ignore it, wrapping myself in a blanket and focusing on the fire I'd built in the portable stove. But then the whispers started. "Evans." I froze. The voice was soft, familiar. Mark's voice. "Evans, I'm here." My heart raced as I scanned the RV, but it was empty. The voice came again, this time from outside. "Come to me." I grabbed my flashlight and threw open the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap. The forest was pitch black, the trees silhouetted against the moonlight. I shone the beam of my flashlight toward the grove. That's when I saw him, Mark, standing just inside the circle of pines. His face was pale but smiling. He was beckoning to me. "Evans, don't be afraid." My legs moved before I could stop them. I stumbled toward the grove, the flashlight shaking in my hand. But as I crossed into the clearing, something shifted. Mark's face changed. The smile widened unnaturally, stretching ear to ear. His eyes darkened, becoming empty black pits. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, as the air around me turned icy. I froze, my body screaming at me to run. "You're not him," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, that grotesque smile never wavering. "But I could be," it said, its voice layered with Mark's and something else, something ancient and cruel. I don't know how I made it back to the RV. My memory of that night is a blur of terror and adrenaline. When I finally locked the door behind me, I collapsed on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't sleep. Instead, I researched. The visitor center had mentioned local legends, and I started piecing them together. The grove had a dark history tied to a young woman named Clara Abbott in the 1800s. She'd been accused of witchcraft after several children went missing. The townsfolk had lynched her in the grove, burying her body beneath the moss-covered stone. But the disappearances didn't stop. Instead, they grew worse. The story said Clara's spirit haunted the grove, luring the lonely and grieving with her song. She offered them peace, reunion with lost loved ones, but at a cost. The next evening I heard the hum again. This time it didn't stop at the grove. It surrounded the RV, seeping into my mind like a drug. I saw visions of Mark, his face, his smile, his laughter. I saw the life we could have had, the children we never got to raise. It was intoxicating, and I felt myself slipping. But then I remembered the symbols on the trees. They weren't just warnings, they were bindings keeping Clara's spirit contained. I grabbed my journal, scribbling down a plan. If I destroyed the grove, I could break her hold. It was a desperate idea, but I had no other choice. Armed with a can of lighter fluid and trembling hands, I ventured back to the grove. The hum grew louder with every step. The air was heavy and suffocating. Shadows danced between the trees, and Clara's voice filled my ears. "Evans, stay. He's waiting for you." When I reached the clearing, she was there, pale and ethereal, her hair glowing like smoke. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I almost believed her. "You can have him back," she said, her voice sweet and venomous. "Just light the fire." I hesitated, my grip on the lighter fluid faltering. But then I saw the truth in her eyes. Emptiness. Hunger. She didn't want to reunite me with Mark. She wanted to consume me. With a scream, I doused the grove in lighter fluid and struck a match. The flames roared to life, engulfing the pines and the moss-covered stone. Clara shrieked, her form twisting and writhing as the fire consumed her. And then silence. By morning, the grove was nothing but ash. The hum was gone, and the forest felt lighter, but I knew I couldn't stay. I packed up the RV and drove away, the charred remains of the singing pines disappearing in my rearview mirror. Even now, I can still hear the faint echo of the hum in my dreams. But I survived. And for now, that's enough. I never wanted to drive Loveland Pass again. I hadn't been back on that stretch of road since the night Marty died. The night his rig went over the edge and disappeared into the fog, like it had never existed. The only thing they found was twisted metal at the bottom of the canyon. I told myself it wasn't my fault, but the guilt stuck to me like oil on a rag, refusing to wash off, no matter how many miles I put between me and that place. But Pete called in a favor. He needed me, and I owed him more than I could count. A convoy job through the Rockies, 3 trucks hauling high-value cargo to a research facility in Colorado. It was big money, but more than that, it was for Pete. He convinced me with a laugh over the phone. "Come on, Red, we need your experience out here. What could go wrong?" I didn't laugh, not this time. So there I was, back in the driver's seat of my rig, with Pete leading the convoy and another trucker, Jerry, bringing up the rear. The snow-capped peaks of the Rockies loomed ahead as we started our ascent through Loveland Pass. The winding road snaked around the mountains, a narrow, dangerous route where one wrong move could send you tumbling into nothingness. The memories hit hard as soon as we passed the first switchback, the same stretch where Marty had lost control. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the familiar weight of regret in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding convoys, always driving solo. The ghosts from that night hadn't let me forget, and now I was back, like I was inviting them to haunt me all over again. "Red, you still with us?" Pete's voice crackled over the CB, cutting through my thoughts. I pressed the mic. Yeah, still here. Roads are getting slick. We should take it slow. Pete agreed, and we settled into the grind, navigating the treacherous turns with caution. The sun had set hours ago, and now only the thin beams of our headlights cut through the growing darkness. The fog rolled in thick and fast, curling around the edges of the road like ghostly fingers. That's when I saw it up ahead. Just barely visible through the fog was a pair of headlights. They flickered like a dying flame, appearing and disappearing in the swirling mist. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to get a better look. It was a truck, no doubt about it. But there was something familiar about the way it moved, the way it hugged the curves of the road like it had been driving this route for years. I keyed the mic again. "Pete, you see that truck up ahead?" Silence. Then Pete's voice came through, confused. "There's no truck, Red. Just us." I glanced in the mirror. Jerry's headlights were still behind me, steady and unchanging. But the truck in front, it wasn't one of ours. I let go of the mic, my gut tightening. Maybe it was a local driver, someone familiar with the area, but as I watched it more closely, I knew that wasn't right. The truck was old, real old, the kind of rig you didn't see much on the road anymore. And then it hit me, hard and fast. The paint job, the faded red stripe down the side, the same color as the one Marty had on his rig. My chest tightened. "No," I whispered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. It couldn't be Marty's truck. It was gone, destroyed, crumpled at the bottom of a canyon. But this was his rig. It had to be. The headlights flickered again, and then the truck was gone, swallowed by the fog like it had never been there. "Red, you good back there?" Pete's voice crackled through again. I didn't respond right away. My pulse was racing, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced around, looking for any sign of the truck, but the road was empty. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice shaky. "Just seeing things." But I wasn't seeing things. Not this time. We kept moving, the road winding higher, the fog thickening. The curves grew sharper, and the guardrails seemed to disappear into the mist, making it feel like we were driving on the edge of the world. That's when the CB crackled again. But this time it wasn't Pete or Jerry's voice. "Red, you gotta help me." The voice was faint, distorted, but I recognized it immediately. My heart stopped. "Marty?" I whispered, disbelief creeping into my voice. The radio stayed silent for a moment, but then it came again, clearer this time, like the words were being dragged through the static. "Red, help me. I can't hold on." I dropped the mic. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Marty was dead, gone, but that voice, it was his. Down to the rasp he always had when he called me Red. I hadn't heard it in years, and yet here it was, crackling through the radio like a ghost from the past. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself it was just some weird interference. But the road ahead seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, like the mountains themselves were trying to trap us in. I checked my mirrors again, half expecting to see the ghost truck reappear. But there was nothing, just the thick swirling fog. "Pete, something's not right," I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should stop, let the fog clear." "Negative, Red. We've got a tight schedule. Keep moving." His response was sharp, almost panicked. Pete wasn't the type to scare easily, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He knew something was wrong too, but he didn't want to say it. The fog pressed in closer, and suddenly the road didn't feel familiar anymore. I'd driven this pass more times than I could count, but now it was like the route had changed. The turns were sharper, the drops steeper. I didn't know where we were headed anymore. And then I saw the truck again. It appeared out of the fog, closer this time, swerving wildly across the road, the old, rusted cab, the faded red stripe. It was Marty's rig, no doubt about it, but when I pulled alongside, there was no driver. The cab was empty, the windows fogged over from the inside. My stomach lurched. I slammed the brakes, swerving to avoid the ghost truck, but it vanished into the mist as quickly as it had come. My truck fishtailed, tires screeching against the wet pavement, but I managed to hold it steady. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Red, what the hell's going on back there?" Pete's voice snapped through the radio. "I saw him," I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. "I saw Marty's truck." Silence hung in the air for a long moment. I knew Pete was processing what I'd said, trying to figure out if I was losing it or if there was something more. But before he could respond, the CB crackled again. Marty didn't make it. It wasn't Pete. It wasn't Jerry. It was Marty. His voice filled the cab, clearer than before, as if he was sitting right next to me. "You let me go, Red. You let me fall." I clenched the wheel, anger and fear boiling in my chest. "I didn't let you fall. I tried, Marty. You didn't try hard enough." The road twisted again, sharper this time, and I could barely see the guardrail through the fog. But I kept driving, adrenaline coursing through me as Marty's voice echoed in my head. Suddenly, Pete's voice cut through the chaos. "Red, you gotta snap out of it. This isn't real." "It's the mountains messing with you," I snapped back. "Messing with me. Don't act like you don't hear him, Pete." Pete didn't answer. The road ahead dipped sharply, and I saw it. The same curve where Marty had gone over. The same stretch of road where his truck had disappeared into the canyon. My heart raced, my mind spinning. Was that where this was leading? Was I about to relive Marty's crash? "Marty, I'm sorry," I whispered, gripping the wheel tighter as the road curved dangerously toward the edge. "I'm so damn sorry." The fog lifted just enough for me to see what was ahead. Marty's truck in the middle of the road blocking the pass. There was no time to stop, no time to think. I swerved hard, avoiding the ghost truck at the last second. My rig skidded, the wheels screeching as I fought to keep control. For a moment, I thought I was going over the edge. The wheels teetered on the lip of the canyon, the guardrail creaking under the weight of the truck. But I yanked the wheel, pulling the rig back onto solid ground. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked in the rearview mirror. The ghost truck was gone. The fog was clearing, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. "Red?" Pete's voice came over the radio, softer now. "You still with us?" "Yeah," I whispered, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. "I'm still here." The mountains stretched ahead, empty and quiet. But I could still hear Marty's voice in the back of my mind, and I knew, in some way, he'd always be with me. We made it through the pass just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the jagged peaks. The road ahead was clear, but I knew I'd never forget the night I'd faced Marty's ghost. I should have known better than to trust an unmarked road. After years of travel writing, you'd think I'd have a sharper instinct for bad decisions. But there I was, driving deeper into Glacier National Forest, chasing a forgotten trail that was supposed to lead me to a ghost town no one could find anymore. Vanished off the map. The ranger at the visitor center had said with a grin, "People go looking for it and never see it again. It's like the road just swallows you up." He laughed, but I could see the glint in his eye. He loved spinning those kinds of tales for tourists. But I wasn't a tourist. I was a writer. Damn it. I had an assignment to finish, and there was no room for ghost stories. I followed the narrow, crumbling logging road as it wound deeper into the trees. My RV rattled along, tires crunching over fallen branches and loose gravel. The road narrowed, barely wide enough for my rig, but I kept going. I'd done my research, and this was the right way, even if the forest seemed determined to reclaim the path. It had been a long day, and I was eager to set up camp and relax before exploring the area the next morning. The further I went, the thicker the trees grew, their branches knitting together overhead, blotting out the late afternoon sun. My GPS had long since lost signal, but I didn't need it. I was prepared. I had maps. I was confident I didn't get lost easily. But as I rounded the last bend in the road, something changed. The sky had been clear earlier, but a dense fog was rolling in now, thick and fast. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road, which had been clear just moments ago, seemed to dissolve into a gray blur. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. Just up ahead, a small clearing appeared through the mist. It wasn't much, but it was enough room for me to park the RV. I didn't have many other options. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The fog clung to everything, making the air feel damp and cold. It shouldn't have been this cold, not in early fall. The chill crept into my bones, but I pushed it aside and started setting up camp. Something about the silence gnawed at me, though. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness in that damned fog. I finished my setup quickly, then retreated to the warmth of the RV. I wasn't nervous, but the quiet was getting under my skin. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into the driver's seat, and pulled out my maps. I spread them across the dash, looking for my next move. The ghost town was supposed to be less than a mile away, hidden deep in the woods, down a trail that was barely marked. Tomorrow, I'd hike to it, get my pictures, take some notes, and be done with it. Easy. But something was off. The road I'd driven on wasn't showing up on the map anymore. I traced the route with my finger, confused. The road was here. I'd just come down it, but now on the map, it wasn't anywhere to be found. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield at the fog-shrouded forest. The ranger's words echoed in my mind. Vanished off the map. I laughed softly to myself. It was a joke, a tall tale to scare off amateur hikers. Nothing more. Still, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I felt it again, that unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, curling around the RV like tendrils. I looked back toward the road I'd driven in on, but it wasn't there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stepped forward, peering into the mist. No road. Just an unbroken line of trees. My stomach tightened. I walked a few more steps, hoping the road would reappear, but it didn't. The forest was dense, the trees close together. There was no sign of the path I had taken just hours earlier. It was as if it had been swallowed whole. I jogged back to the RV, heart racing now. I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to where the road should have been, sweeping the beam through the fog, but all I could see were trees. Tall, dark, and oppressive. My breath fogged the air in front of me as I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The road couldn't just vanish. I hadn't gotten lost. I couldn't have. But when I turned back toward the RV, I felt it. That creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight around, heart pounding, and for a split second I thought I saw movement in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the trees. Hello? My voice cracked. I regretted speaking as soon as the word left my mouth. The fog swallowed my voice, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing. I backed toward the RV, my nerves on edge, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to let a little fog and a missing road freak me out, but something felt wrong. The rational part of my brain was trying to make sense of it. Fog could play tricks on your eyes, and maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. That was all. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I spent the next hour pacing the length of the RV, checking and rechecking my maps, trying to retrace my route in my head. Nothing made sense. The road had been there. I hadn't imagined it. By nightfall, the fog had thickened to the point where I couldn't see more than a few feet outside. The temperature had dropped even more, and I cranked up the RV's heater, wrapping myself in blankets. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, soft thuds like footsteps outside, and whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. It had to be the fog, I told myself. It was distorting sound, making me paranoid. But when I woke in the middle of the night, there were voices. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear them, faint, murmuring voices coming from outside. I crawled to the front of the RV, heart hammering, and peered through the windshield. The figures were back. This time, there were more of them. Shadows in the fog, standing still, watching. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me. Cold, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. I scrambled to turn on the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power. The RV was silent, cold, and dark. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, but the beam barely cut through the fog. I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but my heart was racing, my mind spiraling into panic. The road was gone, the figures were back, and now I was trapped here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and burst out of the RV. The cold hit me like a slab. I marched toward where the road had been, determined to find it, but the forest had shifted. The trees were closer now, the fog denser. I walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape stayed the same. It was as if I was walking in circles. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back at the RV. I could hear the voices again, closer now. They echoed through the fog, indistinct and ghostly. My flashlight flickered, and the shadows appeared again, closer this time, standing just beyond the beam of light. I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. The figures were out there, circling me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadows loomed outside, never coming closer but never leaving. Morning came, though I could barely tell. The fog hadn't lifted, and the road was still gone. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I turned the RV around, driving slowly back the way I had come. If the road was there, I couldn't see it. All I could do was follow the same path I'd taken before, hoping it would lead me out, but it didn't. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, a straight line through the fog, leading nowhere. And as I drove, I realized with sinking dread that I was still trapped. The road hadn't taken me anywhere. I was driving in circles and the figures were still there, watching, waiting. They had me now. The vanishing road wasn't just a story, it was real, and I wasn't getting out. They say you don't know what you're made of until you're staring down death. I always thought that was a load of crap. That was until last night, when everything I believed about myself and the world around me was turned inside out. My name's Lucas Thornhill, and I work for a unit that doesn't officially exist. You won't find us in any government files or classified documents. We're the ones who get called in when the things that go bump in the night start leaving bodies behind. I've been with the Cryptid Suppression Unit for about a decade, though time kind of loses meaning in this line of work. Let's just say I've seen things that would make the bravest souls lose their minds, but nothing prepared me for Deer Ridge. Deer Ridge is a small town in upstate New York, tucked away in the Adirondack Mountains. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where the biggest news of the week might be someone's cow giving birth to twins. But something was wrong in Deer Ridge. The locals started disappearing. First, a hiker, then a couple of teenagers, and finally a whole family was found torn apart in their cabin. The police blamed it on a bear. We knew better. When the call came through, I was already on edge. My last mission hadn't gone smoothly, and I'd been feeling a sense of impending doom ever since. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe I'd just seen too much, but this time it felt different. The reports were more gruesome, the disappearances more frequent, and the survivors, those who had seen whatever was out there, were left raving, their minds shattered beyond repair. I arrived in Deer Ridge under the cover of night, which in retrospect was a mistake. The darkness in the mountains isn't like anywhere else. It's thick, suffocating, as if the shadows themselves are alive, watching. I met up with my partner, Brian O'Connor, a grizzled veteran who'd been with the unit even longer than I had. Brian didn't say much, he never did, but when he spoke, you listened. We geared up in silence, the only sounds being the rustle of our equipment and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. We headed into the woods where the last disappearance had been reported. The cabin where the family had been slaughtered was only a mile in, but it felt like we were walking into the heart of something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world. The air was heavy, almost electric, and the further we went, the quieter the forest became. It was as if every living creature had fled, leaving us to face whatever horror awaited. When we reached the cabin, I felt the first real pang of fear. The place was a wreck. Blood smeared across the walls, furniture overturned, and claw marks that were far too deep to be made by any known animal. Brian was the first to speak. "This ain't a bear," he muttered, his voice low and steady, but I could hear the tension in it. We began searching the area, moving in a tight circle around the cabin. It didn't take long before we found something. A footprint, if you could call it that. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, almost reptilian with 3 long talon-like toes. Brian knelt beside it, his face grim. "Looks like we're dealing with a big one," he said. I nodded, my hand instinctively moving to the handle of my weapon. Whatever this thing was, it was hunting, and it was close. We continued our search, moving deeper into the woods, our senses on high alert. The deeper we went, the more signs we found. Broken branches, disturbed earth, and a stench that grew stronger with each step. It was a foul odor, a mix of rot and something else. Something I couldn't quite place, but which set my nerves on edge. Suddenly, Brian stopped dead in his tracks, raising a hand to signal me to halt. I followed his gaze and saw it. Just beyond the trees, a hulking shape barely visible in the moonlight. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a body covered in matted fur and patches of scales. Its head was elongated, almost crocodilian, with a mouth full of jagged teeth. But what struck me most were its eyes, void of any emotion, just pure primal hunger. Before I could react, it moved, faster than anything that size should be able to. It lunged at us, and I barely had time to dive out of the way. I heard Brian fire off a shot, followed by a guttural snarl that echoed through the trees. The thing turned its attention to me, its eyes locking onto mine. I could feel the weight of its gaze, as if it was sizing me up, deciding whether I was worth the effort. I didn't give it the chance to decide. I rolled to my feet and fired. The sound of the gunshot rang in my ears. The bullet hit its mark, striking the creature in the shoulder. It howled in pain, a high-pitched, unnatural sound that sent a chill down my spine. But it didn't go down. Instead, it charged at me with renewed fury. Brian was on it in a second, tackling the beast from the side. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the creature thrashing and snapping as it tried to shake him off. I took the opportunity to reload, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I aimed for its head, but the thing was too fast. Its movements were erratic as it struggled against Brian. With a final, desperate roar, the creature threw Brian off, sending him crashing into a tree. It turned back to me, blood dripping from its wounds, its eyes burning with rage. I fired again, this time hitting it square in the chest. The beast staggered, its growls turning into a whimper as it dropped to the ground, twitching and convulsing before finally going still. I stood there, panting, my heart racing, as I stared at the lifeless body. It didn't disappear. It just lay there, a mass of fur and scales, its blood soaking into the earth. I rushed to Brian's side. He was hurt but alive, bruised and battered, but nothing that wouldn't heal. He looked up at me, a grim smile on his face. "Told you it wasn't a bear," he rasped. I let out a shaky laugh, the tension of the night finally catching up with me. We radioed for extraction, and as we waited, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. It was over. The thing was dead, and we were still standing. The cleanup crew arrived within the hour, and the body was taken away, every inch of the scene documented and secured. By dawn, there would be no trace of what had happened, just another empty cabin in the woods, another mystery for the locals to whisper about. As we were airlifted out of Deer Ridge, I looked down at the forest below, the sun just beginning to rise over the mountains. The creature was gone, but the memory of those lifeless eyes stayed with me. I knew there were more out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the next unlucky soul to cross their path. But that was someone else's problem now. Brian nudged me with his elbow, breaking me out of my thoughts. "Hey, at least we'll have a good story to tell the rookies," he said with a grin. I smirked back. "Yeah, something like that." The helicopter flew on, taking us back to where we belong, away from the darkness, away from Deer Ridge. And just like that, it was over. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence, back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there in the fog. My name's Jack Evans, slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 15 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver recovering lost cargo off the coast, but the sea and I had fallen out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job, no questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well, but now my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. "Jack." The voice was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. "Jack, help me." I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is this?" No answer. Just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again. This time clearer, like the static was peeling away. "Jack, why didn't you come back?" I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner, the guy who drowned 6 years ago in that accident. The accident I'd been running from ever since. "Get a grip, Slick," I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog, it was all getting to me. That's what it had to be. Just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life, another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights, blinking faintly just off the edge of the road where the cliffs dropped down to the sea. At first, I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog. But these lights weren't moving. They hovered low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container, it was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, the fog, the voice on the radio, it all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. "Jack?" The voice hit me again, this time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stop it!" I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. "You're not real." But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the sea, like an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. "You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown." The memories hit hard and fast. The dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea. And now, here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed, and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo. It was something alive, something old. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked around to the back of the truck. The fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muffling the world in a heavy silence. The lights over the water had disappeared, but I could still feel them watching me. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the trailer walls. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me knew I shouldn't open it. The other part, the part that was tired of running, needed to know what I was hauling. As I unlocked the container, a voice whispered in my ear, "Come back, Jack." The doors swung open with a metallic creak, and inside, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, was an object, an artifact. It looked ancient, carved from dark stone, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The hum was coming from it, pulsating like a heartbeat, sending ripples of energy through the air. I took a step back, the realization sinking in like a weight in my chest. This thing wasn't just cargo, it was something tied to the sea, something old and powerful, and it had been calling to me all night. The fog swirled around me, thickening, and I felt a presence, multiple presences, moving through it. Figures, humanoid but distorted, like they were submerged in water, appeared at the edges of the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were slow, deliberate, as they waded through the fog toward me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming clearer. Fishermen, divers, sailors, all of them dripping with seawater, their faces pale and bloated. And among them, I saw Dave. His eyes locked on mine, his expression blank, his hand outstretched. "You left me." His voice echoed in my head. "You left me to die." I backed away, but the sea's pull was too strong. The hum from the artifact grew louder, and the figures closed in, their voices mingling with the wind, calling me back to the water, back to the depths where I'd lost Dave. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I tried to save you." Dave's expression didn't change, but his hand dropped. The figures stopped, hovering at the edge of the road. The hum from the artifact slowed, the vibrations easing. The fog, heavy and thick, began to lift. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone on the road. I closed the trailer doors, locking the artifact inside, and climbed back into the cab. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled away from the coast, leaving the fog and the ghosts behind. The road stretched out ahead, empty and quiet. But the weight in my chest remained. The sea wasn't done with me. Not yet, and neither was Dave. That night, as I drove into the sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just scratched the surface of something far deeper, something I couldn't escape. The road may have saved me this time, but the echoes from the deep were still calling. My name is Jack Logan, and I'm 39 years old. This happened last fall in October, when the leaves were fiery red and gold and the air had just begun to carry that sharp, cold edge. I'd parked my RV at Echo Bluff State Park in Missouri, looking for solitude and a break from the noise of the world. I didn't expect to find the kind of silence that could swallow a man whole. The first thing that struck me about the place was its beauty. The limestone bluffs towered over the shimmering current river, and the forest seemed to stretch forever, untouched and ancient. It was the kind of place that could make you believe in something bigger than yourself, something powerful and indifferent. I parked in a secluded campsite near the edge of the bluff, far enough from the other campers to feel like I had the place to myself. That was the way I liked it. After years in the army and too much time surrounded by chaos, I craved isolation. But even as I set up camp, something about the place felt off. Near the edge of the bluff was an old wooden swing set. The wood was weathered, the ropes frayed, and it looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Yet, as I unpacked my gear, I noticed one of the swings moving, just a gentle sway, as if caught by the breeze. Except there was no wind. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe it was nothing. The next day, I hiked to the river to fish, hoping to catch my dinner. The air was crisp, and the sound of the water rushing over the rocks was soothing. That's when I met her, Bethany Cole, the park host. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with an easy smile and a clipboard in hand. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "How's the camping going?" "Fine," I said, keeping it short. She glanced toward the bluff. "You're parked near the swing set, aren't you?" "Yeah, why?" Her smile faltered. "Some folks say it's haunted. Locals call it the widow's swing. They say she's still out there, looking for her kids." I raised an eyebrow. "A ghost story? Really?" Bethany shrugged. "Just thought you should know. Strange things happen around here." I wanted to laugh it off, but her words stuck with me. That night, I sat by the campfire, listening to the crackle of the flames and the occasional hoot of an owl. I should have felt at peace, but I didn't. The swing set was just barely visible in the firelight, and every so often I thought I saw one of the swings move. Around midnight, I crawled into the RV, exhausted from the day's hike. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up a few hours later to a sound I couldn't place, like children laughing. I sat up, my heart pounding. The sound was faint, drifting through the still night air. "Hello?" I called out, stepping outside. The laughter stopped. The swing set was perfectly still. But as I turned to go back inside, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Small, muddy footprints leading from the swing set to my RV. They looked like a child's, but they ended abruptly at my door. The next morning, I decided to hike deeper into the park. Maybe I was imagining things. Too much isolation can mess with your head. On the trail, I met an older man, thin, wiry, with a face like weathered leather. He didn't say much, just nodded as we passed each other. "Beautiful day," I said, trying to be polite. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes sharp and unnerving. You seen them yet? Seen who? The children. They like to play near the bluff, but be careful. They're not just playing. Before I could ask what he meant, he walked away, disappearing into the trees. That night, the laughter returned, louder this time. It was joined by the creaking sound of the swings moving. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the beam cutting through the darkness. At the edge of the bluff, I saw her. She was standing by the swing set, a woman in a tattered black dress, her long hair obscuring her face. Her body swayed slightly, as if she were caught in a slow, mournful dance. Who's there? I called out, but she didn't respond. I stepped closer and she lifted her head. Her eyes were hollow, black pits, and her mouth twisted into a scream that I couldn't hear but could feel deep in my chest. The swing beside her creaked violently, as if an invisible child were kicking it into motion. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. When I looked again, she was gone. By the fourth night, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. The laughter and creaking had become relentless, and the small footprints kept appearing around my RV, always leading toward the bluff. That night, the fog rolled in thick and heavy, muffling every sound. The laughter stopped, replaced by whispers. Jack! It was my name, carried on the wind. The voice was soft, almost pleading. I grabbed my knife and headed to the swing set. If this was some kind of prank, I was going to put an end to it. As I approached, the fog parted and I saw them. 3 children sitting on the swings, their faces pale and unnaturally still. Behind them stood the woman, her hollow eyes fixed on me. You left them, she said, her voice like nails on glass. You left them to die. My chest tightened. She was wrong. She didn't know me. I didn't. I started, but the children began to move toward me, their laughter turning into shrill, echoing cries. I stumbled back, tripping over a small object. It was a locket. Tarnished and old, the clasp rusted shut. The woman's gaze fell on the locket, and her expression shifted from rage to sorrow. Help us, she whispered. I understood then. She wasn't angry. She was grieving, trapped in her pain. I opened the locket and saw a tiny photograph inside. A young woman and 3 children smiling together. I placed the locket on the swing and whispered a prayer for peace, my voice shaking. The wind picked up, carrying away the fog. The woman and the children faded into the night, their forms dissolving like smoke. The next morning, I packed up and left Echo Bluff, unable to stay another night. I left the locket at the park office, hoping it would stay with someone who understood its importance. Even now, I can still hear the laughter in my dreams, but it's softer now, more like echoes of a memory than the cries of the damned. Some wounds never fully heal, but maybe, just maybe, they can find a little peace. I've always found solace in solitude. It's why I took this trip in the first place. Just me, my RV, and the open road. After months of sleepless nights and a marriage that felt like it was unraveling by the day, I needed to get away. Mohan State Park seemed perfect, remote, quiet, beautiful. A place where I could clear my head, reset, and figure out how to piece my life back together. I parked my RV near Hollow Creek Trail, far from the more popular campsites. As I set up camp, I noticed the silence, no birds, no wind, just an oppressive stillness that felt heavy against my chest. I chalked it up to being out in nature alone. It wasn't eerie, it was peaceful, I told myself, exactly what I needed. The first night was uneventful. I made a small fire, cooked some food, and let the silence settle over me. But when I crawled into bed, my thoughts grew louder. Anna's face floated in my mind, her eyes filled with frustration during our last argument. You're so good at shutting everyone out, she'd said, tears streaming down her face. It's like you want to be alone. I'd snapped back, defensive and cruel. Maybe I do. I hadn't spoken to her since. The guilt gnawed at me, but I forced it down. I was here to move on, not to dwell. But even as I drifted into sleep, I thought I heard footsteps crunching outside the RV. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind. Except there was no wind. The next day, I decided to hike Hollow Creek Trail. The ranger I'd spoken to earlier had warned me about it. Not many people go that way anymore, he'd said. Strange stories. You'd be better off sticking to the main trails. But that only intrigued me more. I liked a challenge. And besides, the stories were probably just local legends meant to scare off tourists. I wasn't a tourist. I was a survivalist. Someone who prided himself on his ability to handle anything nature threw at him. The trail was beautiful but overgrown, winding through dense forest. I stopped to take in the quiet, snapping a few photos of the sun filtering through the trees. That's when I saw the carvings. They were etched into the bark of several trees along the trail. Crude faces, hollow-eyed and screaming. Something about them felt wrong, like they weren't meant to be seen. I touched one, running my fingers along the grooves, and shivered at how cold the bark was. "Don't touch those," a voice said. I spun around to see a woman standing a few feet away. She was pale, her hair tangled, and her clothes looked as though she'd been wandering the woods for days. "Who are you?" I asked. "Mara," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "You need to leave." "What are you talking about?" "This place." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "It doesn't let people go. The hollow men, they see you now." I frowned. "Hollow men? They feed on guilt, on regret. They'll take you if you let them." I didn't believe her, of course. She was probably just some local trying to scare me off. Still, something in her eyes unsettled me. Something that made me feel small and vulnerable in the vastness of the forest. "I'll be fine," I said, brushing past her. She didn't follow, but her warning stayed with me. That night, the woods seemed darker than before. The fire barely lit the clearing, its flames weak and sputtering. As I sat by the RV, I heard them again, footsteps circling just beyond the edge of the firelight. My stomach knotted, but I refused to show fear. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the trees. "Who's there?" I called. Silence. I turned back toward the RV, and that's when I saw them, faint handprints smeared across the windows. They hadn't been there earlier. My skin crawled. I locked the door and sat with my back against it, clutching my hunting knife. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the carvings, of faces with hollow eyes staring back at me. And always, I heard whispers, low, guttural voices calling my name. The next morning, I decided to confront whatever was out there. I packed my gear and set out for Hollow Creek Trail, determined to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. The woods were silent again, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. The carvings were still there, more vivid than before. As I stared at them, I heard Mara's voice behind me. "You shouldn't have come back." I turned to see her standing in the middle of the trail, her face pale and drawn. "What's going on here?" I demanded. "Who are you, really?" "I tried to warn you," she said, "but it's too late now. They've marked you." "Who?" My voice rose, anger masking the fear gnawing at me. She pointed past me. I turned and froze. The hollow men were there, standing in the shadows between the trees. They were tall and gaunt, their faces smooth and featureless. They didn't move, but their presence was suffocating. The air grew cold, and a faint smell of decay filled my nostrils. "They'll take you," Mara whispered, "unless you let go." "Let go of what?" "Your guilt," she said. "It's what they feed on. It's why they're here." I wanted to laugh, to tell her she was crazy. But the hollow men stepped closer, and my body refused to move. I heard Anna's voice then, clear as day. "You did this to us." The words cut through me like a blade. The memories I'd tried so hard to bury came rushing back. The nights I'd ignored her, the arguments I'd started, the pain I'd caused. I felt it all at once, and the weight of it brought me to my knees. The hollow men surrounded me, their hollow faces inches from mine. I felt their cold breath against my skin, heard the low hum of their whispers. Mara's voice broke through the noise. "Say it," she urged. "Confess." "I'm sorry," I choked out. I pushed her away. I couldn't. My voice cracked. I couldn't let her in. The hollow men stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, one by one, they faded into the trees. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the trail near my RV. The sun was rising, casting golden light across the forest. Mara was gone, and the carvings were just faint scratches on the trees. I packed up and left without looking back. The drive home was quiet, the weight in my chest lighter than it had been in years. I wasn't sure if I'd escaped the curse or if it had given me a second chance. Months later, I returned to Hollow Creek. I needed closure. To see if the carvings were still there. The trail was overgrown, as though no one had walked it in years. But the trees still bore the faint outlines of hollow faces, and the air was heavy with silence. As I traced one of the carvings, I heard a voice, a whisper, low and familiar. That day, the forest felt alive around me, and I realized I would never truly leave. I once heard that and nothing good ever happens after midnight, but I never truly believed it until that night. It all started when my friend Alex and I decided to take a spontaneous road trip to clear our heads. We both had a lot going on, and the idea of hitting the open road seemed like the perfect escape. My name is Max, and I'm a guy who thrives on adventure. I've always been the type to take the road less traveled, sometimes to my detriment. Alex, on the other hand, is a planner, the kind of guy who likes to know exactly where he's going and how he's getting there. We couldn't be more different, but that's what made our friendship work. Our destination was a small town in Oregon, a place neither of us had ever been to but had heard great things about. We set off from San Francisco, and everything was smooth sailing until we hit the forests of Northern California. That's when things started to get weird. It was about 11 p.m. when we realized we had taken a wrong turn. Our GPS had lost signal, and the road we were on wasn't on any map we had. The trees seemed to close in on us as we drove further into the unknown. The canopy above blocked out most of the moonlight, making the darkness feel almost tangible. "Max, this doesn't feel right," Alex said, his voice tinged with unease. "Relax, man. We'll find our way back. It's just a detour," I replied, trying to keep the mood light. But as the minutes ticked by, my confidence began to wane. We hadn't seen another car or any sign of civilization for what felt like hours. The road became narrower and rougher, and the forest seemed to grow denser. Just when we thought we might have to turn back, we saw a faint light through the trees. It was coming from a cabin, old and dilapidated, but still standing. We decided to check it out, hoping to get some directions or at least figure out where we were. We parked the car a little way off and walked toward the cabin. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting wood. As we approached, we noticed the door was slightly ajar, and the light inside flickered like an old oil lamp. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I called out, pushing the door open a bit more. No response. The place looked abandoned, with dust covering every surface and cobwebs hanging from the corners. We stepped inside, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The light was coming from a small room to the left, where an old lantern sat on a table, its flame dancing weakly. "Maybe we should leave," Alex whispered, his eyes darting around nervously. "Just a quick look and then we'll go," I assured him, though I was starting to feel uneasy myself. We moved further into the cabin, and that's when we saw it. The walls were covered in photographs, dozens of them, all black and white. They showed people in various states of distress, their faces contorted in pain and fear. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, stained dark with something that looked suspiciously like blood. "Max, we need to get out of here. Now," Alex said, his voice shaking. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. But as we turned to leave, we heard the door creak shut. Standing in the doorway was a man, tall and gaunt, his clothes tattered and his face obscured by a mess of unkempt hair. He held a large knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. "Leaving so soon?" he rasped, a sinister smile spreading across his face. We backed away, but he advanced toward us, his eyes cold and devoid of any emotion. There was no doubt in my mind that this was his hunting ground, and we had just become his prey. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Alex's arm and pulling him toward the back of the cabin. We burst through a back door and into the dense forest, our breath coming in ragged gasps. We could hear the man crashing through the underbrush behind us, getting closer with every step. Panic fueled our movements as we sprinted through the darkness, branches whipping at our faces and snagging our clothes. We stumbled into a small clearing and saw another figure standing there. A woman this time, equally disheveled and holding an axe. We were surrounded. "Please, we just want to leave," Alex begged, his voice trembling. The woman tilted her head, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "You're not going anywhere." They closed in on us, and I knew we had no choice but to fight. I grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at the man, catching him off guard and knocking the knife from his hand. Alex did the same with the woman, but she was quick, dodging his blows and swinging the axe at him. We fought desperately, our survival instincts kicking in. The sounds of our struggle echoed through the forest, a brutal symphony of grunts, screams, and the clash of metal and wood. I managed to land a solid hit on the man, sending him sprawling to the ground. Alex wasn't as lucky. The woman had him pinned, the axe raised high above her head. "No!" I shouted, rushing to help him. I tackled her to the ground, and Alex scrambled to his feet. Together, we wrestled the axe from her grip and struck her down. The man was getting up again, but a swift kick to the head sent him back down, unconscious. We didn't wait to see if they would get up again. We ran, our hearts pounding and our bodies aching. We ran until we found the road again. And then we ran some more until we saw the lights of a small gas station in the distance. We burst into the gas station, startling the clerk behind the counter. "Help us! We were attacked!" Alex shouted, his voice raw with fear. The clerk called the police and we waited, trembling and exhausted. When the police arrived, we led them back to the cabin, hoping it hadn't disappeared like some twisted mirage. It hadn't. The police found the cabin just as we described, along with the bodies of the man and woman and the grisly photographs on the walls. They assured us that we were safe now, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease as we drove away from that place. In the end, we made it to Oregon, but the trip didn't feel like an escape anymore. It felt like a narrow escape from death. My name is Daniel Harper, but most people just call me Danny. I'm 41, and I used to think I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I spent 25 years as a long-haul trucker, logging miles across empty highways and desolate landscapes. Nothing fazed me. Not bad weather, sleepless nights, or the endless stretches of silence. But what happened last fall on the Midnight Trail shook me to my core, and I'm not sure I'll ever recover. It had been 6 months since my daughter Carly passed away. 6 months of guilt clawing at my chest, whispering that it was my fault. I wasn't home enough. I should have seen the signs that something was wrong. If I'd been there, maybe I could have stopped her from getting in that car with her reckless boyfriend. She was only 17. It wasn't fair. But life isn't fair, is it? I couldn't sit in that empty house anymore, surrounded by her pictures, her unfinished school projects, and her laughter that no longer echoed in the halls. So I hit the road. I loaded up my RV, a beaten-up Class C I'd been fixing up, and decided to visit some of the places I used to pass by during my trucking days, but never stopped to explore. Spruce Knob Rocks National Recreation Area was one of them. I'd heard of the Midnight Trail from a guy at a gas station. He called it beautiful but spooky, and for some reason that stuck with me. I arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun was sinking behind the mountains. The trailhead parking lot was empty, and the forest beyond it stretched endlessly, a mix of shadows and fading light. A small memorial stood at the entrance, a wooden cross, weathered and tilted, with the name Eli Baker carved into it. Beneath it, someone had placed a handful of wilted flowers. I stared at it for a long moment. Something about it unsettled me, but I couldn't say why. Shaking off the feeling, I parked the RV, set up camp, and made myself a quick dinner. As the stars came out, the world grew eerily quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. I didn't think much of it until later that night when I heard footsteps outside the RV. Soft. Deliberate. Circling. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, scanning the area. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and the faint outline of the trailhead. The footsteps had stopped. I stayed out there for a few minutes, my breath fogging in the cold night air before retreating inside. That's when the radio turned on. The RV's old, static-filled radio crackled to life, playing a distorted version of Carly's favorite song. My stomach dropped. The volume was low, the lyrics warped, but I knew that song. I lunged for the dial, twisting it off. My hands were shaking. "Get a grip, Danny," I muttered to myself. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I packed a small bag and set out on the trail. The air was crisp, and the forest felt alive in a way I couldn't explain, like it was watching me. I told myself I was imagining things, that I just needed to focus on the hike. I'd always found peace in the rhythm of walking, one step after another, the weight of the world fading with every mile. About an hour in, I noticed something strange. The boot prints on the trail ahead of me looked fresh, but there was no one else out here. When I checked, they matched the soles of my boots. I tried to brush it off, but the unease was growing, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Then came the voices. At first, they were faint. A laugh here, a whispered word there. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. The forest swallowed the sound. No one answered. I kept walking, faster now, my eyes scanning the trees. The voices grew louder, overlapping fragments of conversation that made no sense. I thought I heard Carly's voice once, calling my name. I spun around, heart in my throat, but there was nothing but trees and shadows. Around midday, I stumbled upon an old campsite. The gear was rotting, the fabric of the tent frayed and covered in moss. A journal lay half buried in the dirt, its pages yellowed and damp. I flipped through it, reading snippets of frantic entries about getting lost, hearing voices, and seeing shadows. The last entry chilled me to the bone. It won't let me leave until I face the truth. I shoved the journal back into the dirt and kept moving, my unease turning into outright fear. Not long after, I saw someone up ahead, a man, his back to me, wearing a faded flannel shirt and a backpack. Relief washed over me. "Hey," I called, jogging to catch up. "Hey, wait!" The man didn't stop. He didn't even turn around. As I got closer, I noticed something was off. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. My relief curdled into dread. "Hey," I called again, my voice cracking. The man turned. His face was blurred, like a smudged photograph, and his eyes, if he even had eyes, were dark pits. He raised a hand, pointing back the way I came, and whispered, "Turn back." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, and when I looked up again, he was gone. The trail became a nightmare after that. No matter which direction I walked, I kept ending up in the same spots. The old campsite, a distinctive boulder with moss growing in the shape of a handprint, the trailhead itself. It was like the forest was looping, trapping me in its maze. The sunlight never changed, stuck in a perpetual golden glow that made the shadows stretch unnaturally long. My flashlight flickered despite being new, and every time I checked my watch, the time seemed wrong, jumping forward or backward by hours. I started to panic. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps, and I ran, desperate to find a way out. But the more I ran, the louder the voices grew, a cacophony of laughter, sobbing, and whispers. By the time I reached the summit, night had fallen. The trail opened onto a clearing dominated by a massive, twisted tree. Its bark was carved with dozens of names, some faded with age, others fresh and sharp. My breath caught in my throat as I saw Carly's name among them, freshly carved at the bottom. "No," I whispered, stepping closer. "No, no, no." The whispers converged, coalescing into a single figure, a girl standing beneath the tree. Carly. Her hair hung limp around her face, her clothes torn and dirty, but her eyes were empty. "Why did you leave me, Dad?" she said, her voice hollow, echoing. "You weren't there when I needed you." Tears streamed down my face. "I'm sorry," I choked. "I'm so sorry, Carly. I should have been there. I should have... You let me die," she said, her voice rising, her face twisting with anger. "You let me die!" I fell to my knees, sobbing, the weight of my guilt crushing me. "I didn't mean to," I whispered. "I didn't mean to." The voices grew deafening, the shadows closing in around me. I felt the forest's judgment, its unrelenting demand for the truth. I had to let go. I had to forgive myself. "I'm sorry," I said, looking up at Carly's figure. "I'll never stop missing you, but I can't bring you back. I can't stay here." Her expression softened, the anger fading. She stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch me. And then she was gone. The whispers stopped. The forest fell silent. And when I looked up, the sun was rising. I made my way back to the RV, exhausted but alive. The loop was broken, and the trailhead was clear. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the tree at the summit, its twisted branches reaching skyward. Carly's name was still there, but it no longer felt like a curse. It felt like a goodbye. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my dreams, but now it's not angry, it's at peace, and maybe, just maybe, so am I.